don't give a fuck. You're tripping with JJ.
Wow!
Fuck you, asshole.
Tell your bitch I said hi, nigga. Welcome, everybody. I am your host, JJ, and you are on Tripping with Motherfucking JJ podcast. Today we have a super duper special guest in the building, okay? She's like extra special, you know what I'm saying? Super extra special. She's a former Olympian, ex-wrestler, KELSEY Campbell. Give it up for KELSEY Campbell. We love KELSEY. Okay? So KELSEY, when you was a wrestler, obviously you're going through a lot of competition. You got to train your body, train your mind, situate your spirit to be very competitive against your competition. How did you prepare on a daily basis to stay that focused?
It's been really interesting because when you're in the middle of something, and I think this goes for anything in life, like when I say anything, I mean when you're focusing on a specific goal, you get so zeroed in that you're not thinking about what are all the things I need to do. I think as humans, we do that. We're like, what are all the things I need to do to accomplish this? But when you're actually on track for something so specific, it's not like that. I feel like it's more like early on, you come across, you're like, oh, I need to focus on this. And then you start that. And then you organically are like, oh, I need to focus on this. And then very gradually those things build. It's a journey. Everyone's journey is different. And my journey in terms of wrestling in the Olympics was and still is so rogue, and to this date I have never really come across anybody that has even a similar path that I had, but I do believe there's quite a few wrestlers that have gone on to the Olympics, my former opponents, people that have gone on to win medals that have had quite a few similarities to my path, even though their journey was different ultimately. But I think in terms of staying focused, to answer your question, it's not so overwhelming. I mean, when you're focused on a goal, when you're really focused on a goal that you really want, like for all the right reasons, quote unquote, and you're just determined, and that is like the only option you're giving yourself. You're just focusing on the next step. I feel like, at least for me, it was like that. I mean, certainly there were overwhelming moments, but looking back, I'm like, yeah, those things kind of all came, like the dieting and the training and the training with the right people and training at the right places and connecting with the right sponsors, all that stuff kind of happened organically. I had people that I wanted to connect with, but I think when you just start to make the right decisions and kind of aim yourself towards a specific goal like that, you just naturally navigate to those things. So it becomes less of a checklist and more of a just focus on what's in front of you.
Right. You started this whole journey on a bet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you started tryouts basically to challenge yourself and see if you could establish what you set yourself out to do.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a small potatoes type gig. It was like a handful of high school boys that didn't think I could last 2 weeks. I mean, I wasn't trying to do it. I mean, you think when you're in high school, you think high school is the world, right? So, I mean, from that standpoint, yeah, it was like a big deal for me to prove these kids wrong. But, I mean, mostly I did other sports, but that wasn't what I was naturally good at. I was always naturally good at music and dance. And so to even be an athlete in terms of, like, competing against other individual sport athletes, that was more just trying to prove to them that I could do it. It wasn't, oh, this is like something I planned on anyways. I didn't plan to wrestle in high school. Like, I had no plans for that. I had no plans to wrestle after high school. I had no plans to wrestle after those 2 weeks. And the more that I revisit this journey and tell people, the more I'm like, yeah, that was actually really random. This actually isn't like, no, people don't just, they don't take things up on a bet and then it becomes their career. That's not the norm. So it was very, yeah, it was, I did it to win a bet. I kept doing it because these teammates became family, and then I kept doing it even further because my coaches in high school, they were the ones who were like, oh, there's tournaments for girls. There's places you can go to compete. And it was like that. It was like inches, you know? It was like, oh, here's something you could go to. And then I go and I don't win, but I compete really well. And I'm like, oh, I could be good against people like me, like females.
Right.
And it was like that. It was, and you think, oh, Olympics. But at that time, the Olympics had just been introduced for women's wrestling. It wasn't, I mean, I started wrestling in 2002, 2003. The first Olympics for wrestling was 2004. So it was just such a young emerging sport. And I was such a young wrestler that I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was still like, I'm going to be a singer for the next whatever.
So even during this time where you was trying out for wrestling, in your mind you was preparing for wrestling, and you was set out to achieve this goal, you still had music in the back of your mind to some degree where you're like, I want to do this, but I prefer to be doing music.
I can't, okay, so my senior year of high school, when I was doing all this, like, I know that I kept myself busy on purpose. Like, I was one of those people that was like, I needed to be out of my house as much as possible and just busy doing stuff. So the motivation to be busy wasn't difficult, but it's weird because with wrestling, I really just showed up to practice and did what the coach told me. It wasn't like I left and I was like, my mind was brimming with all these things I needed to do, because I barely knew how to do anything. So how could I have known what to prepare for outside of practice? And then for music, like in my high school, we had senior projects, you know, like that culminating capstone thing that you do. And, you know, I had friends that they created pamphlets and they created like jogathons and like very manageable, awesome things, right? I did a concert. I did a concert with backup dancers, and I had hosts, and I had flyers, and I literally advertised at the surrounding high school. I mean, it was like, this is not weird for 2021, but in 2002, this was super weird and innovative, and kids were not doing this.
Right.
So to answer your question, yeah, I was going to wrestling practice, winning a bet, and then in school, I had to keep my grade. I wasn't a naturally good student, but I had to be a good student because of athletics. But school was hard for me. I still to this day believe that I don't learn the way that I don't learn traditionally. Like, I think I did struggle a little bit in the way that I learned.
So you just needed more help.
Even in college, I struggled a lot, but this wasn't something that was discussed back then, you know?
Gotcha.
But yeah, like I was just pursuing being a musician, and I was very aware as a high school student back then that to be a singer that's not something that like you brag about. There wasn't even social media to brag about it. And it was like, okay, so what are you going to do in college? Like, so what are you going to do to make money? Like,
right.
That's so nice that you sing, you're so good, but what are you going to do for a living?
Right.
Like, it just wasn't something you talked about. You didn't make money being influential with your artistic abilities like you can now. So it was just so different. So, you know, wrestling happened and I really saw an opportunity, and it wasn't like an opportunity, oh, I'll use music to catapult me in this. It was just like, at that age even, I was like, oh, like, I have a very short window to do this. I'm going to pursue this. And I'm good enough at music that I can come back to this. And
Nice.
for real, like it's weird. Like my mindset back then, with all my insecurities and whatever, I still was clear about what I was going to accomplish in my life. I was very clear. I was going to be a singer. I was just going to pause it for a while because, for a season, AKA a couple years, I was going to do this sport,
Right. So one of your biggest challenges throughout your career was that you hurt your shoulder.
Yeah. Yeah, you must have really dug, because I don't talk about that a lot. I've talked about it a little bit, but not a lot. So I've always been, leading up to London and even Rio, I always did a lot of extra stuff that I didn't talk to people about. There were many days where I did multiple workouts. I would go to, obviously I was a resident at the Olympic Training Center, but then I had my one-on-one coach, and I would go to his gym and do workouts with him, and he was brilliant. And I had seen him take underdogs into medal matches at the Olympics, and he was a coach for the club I wrestled for, and I was very soft-skinned back then. I was younger, but I was like, I don't really care what he puts me through. I want to be like those athletes.
Right.
And so I did a lot of extra training, and leading up to London, I had made the team, and it was like June-ish. The Olympics were like end of August, September. And I still remember, it's crazy because I still remember the first time I felt my collarbone pop. Like, I remember the workout.
Was that during the practice?
It was a practice, but it wasn't like a national team practice. It wasn't like a prep camp. It was like
scrimmage?
I was like training with a wrestler. She was an age group. By that I mean she was like in a younger age group. She was in high school still, and she was just someone I kind of mentored and trained with a lot. I was actually in Texas, and I was training with her, and I remember we were at this MMA gym. I can't remember the name.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember we were doing some technique, and I felt a pop. It didn't even hurt. It was just like a pop. I was like, and that was the first time I noticed it. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. And it got to the point where, like, I couldn't, like, shoot in on a leg without, like, seeing red. It was so painful.
Wow.
And seriously, back then, like, people didn't post when they were having surgery. Like, it was just, social media was just, it's ever changing, but back then people just weren't as transparent about that stuff. Unless you were like Kobe Bryant, like, unless you were like the best in the world, like, nobody talked about those things. And certainly I didn't talk about those things.
So you kept it from your coach?
My coach knew, but I'd made the Olympic team, and when you make the team in a sport like that, people are like looking at you like, oh, if they test positive or if they get hurt, like, I'm next in line.
What year was that you made the Olympics?
2012.
Right.
And so I was very private about it. There was probably like 3 people that knew really how bad the injury was. My national team coach, the head of my main sponsor, and my main physical therapist at the training center. And I did get surgery after the Olympics, but leading up to it, it took us a while to even figure out what was wrong. And when we found out the injury, I did so much research because I couldn't even train the way that I knew how.
Right.
I couldn't do anything without pain.
Right.
And we didn't know what it was, so to even treat it was tricky. But I was diligent, and what I found, like, there was maybe like 3 or 5 surgeries ever in the U.S. that addressed this type of injury, and they weren't wrestlers. They were like baseball players and swimmers. So when you find that type of information, my PTs at the Olympic Training Center, like the best in the country, are like, yeah, we don't recommend surgery. But I'm like, okay, well, if I don't try something, my career is over. I can't even train with people 2 weight classes below me right now.
Right. So then you found the doctor who answered your prayers, and he said he could get you to 98%.
You really dug. That's very specific, yes. Yeah, like I was doing a speaking tour in New York, and there was I don't remember exactly how I came across him, but it was very serendipitous. It was like I overheard a volunteer PT in Colorado talking about, I think I was talking about my injury, and this volunteer heard me and was like, I know a couple surgeons that could do that. I mean, it was like, if I had been talking quieter, he wouldn't have heard me. You know, it was like that.
Yeah.
It was like
one of those things.
It was one of those things. And so I was doing a speaking tour in New York after the Olympics, and the surgeon also happened to be the team doctor for USA Swimming. And USA Swimming is like kind of a higher clout sport, right? They're like
superior athletes.
It's not that. It's more that they're more mainstream, so they attract more funding. They attract more fans. So there's just more, because there's more money, there's more quality in their support stuff. I mean,
they can afford it.
They can afford it, right? So I felt like, okay, this is a USA Swimming team doctor. Like he's, Phelps was still competing. Just to give you an idea, these are the athletes that this doctor is dealing with.
Wow.
Right.
Huge.
And so I knew that I was like, he deals with like the best of the best. And I remember scheduling the consult. We delayed my return trip a day. I went and saw him. And you have to understand, like, everyone I had seen in Colorado, the people that I had been seeing for years and years and years living there, all of them told me not to get surgery. All of them discouraged me doing anything other than physical therapy. And I couldn't like unbutton my shirt without my collarbone popping.
Wow, it's painful.
Yeah, and there wasn't a rehab on the planet that was gonna help me with that.
Wow.
So
that was like a miracle for you.
it was. And so when he told me that I don't remember the exact, I think he said like 97, 98%. When he told me he could get me there, I got emotional because it had been so long and a heartbreaking Olympic experience. I just, when you hear bad news for so long, it just moves you to hear good news. Like, it's one of those things where you're like, I'm not crazy. I knew that there was something I could do.
Right.
And we did the surgery, and to the dismay of a lot of my, like, immediate support staff. I mean, I have really, really horrible experiences after I decided to it's just weird how people are people at the end of the day, regardless of their title. And
what do you mean it was not supportive?
Like, after I decided to get the surgery, I would go in to do, like, rehab. Because when you do surgery, you do physical therapy. That's normal.
Hand in hand.
And I would go in and, like, therapists just wouldn't show up. Or they'd just show up late and they'd be like, oh, you didn't tell me you were here. Like, that kind of stuff happened just like petty stuff, right? And it was just like...
What was your response to that?
I mean, I was a younger person. I was a younger athlete. And
right.
I at that point, I still would just bite my tongue a lot.
Right.
I was much more polite back then than I am now.
Hard lessons.
I had never had to fight for myself so much. That was the first time in my athletic career that I had to fight for I had always had to fight to improve, but this was different than just getting on the mat and fighting to get your hand raised. This was like the you have the street smart and the book smart, right? You know how there's those contrasts in, like, experience. This wasn't like a hand-to-hand battle. This was like a different type of battle where I'm literally going against professional input, and I'm trusting myself. And because I got a different medical opinion, and I was trusting myself as an athlete, the number one athlete in the U.S., I mean, the pushback was real, and it was not fun. And And then I was going through some mental health stuff, which also wasn't really discussed back then anywhere on social media or anywhere else. And I decided that I needed to leave the training center. I mean, it got really hard, and there was a lot of backlash and pushback. And so the fact that I do fight for myself now and I am more vocal, I mean, that didn't just happen. Like, I just went through things in my career that I look back and I'm like, it's unfortunate. Like, it didn't need to be that way.
So you would have done it differently, needless to say.
I mean, I would have still gotten the surgery because he lived up to it. I had the surgery, rehabbed it back to 100% in 6 months, textbook. Like, there was no literature on this surgery before I had it. None. We made up a lot of the rehab, me and my PT. There's a ton of shoulder surgery, but this was a collarbone injury, so it was a little different. And I have never had an incident since the surgery, ever.
Wow.
Ever. So, I mean, I made the right choice.
Wow.
And I kept competing.
Wow.
I made another U.S. Olympic team, and I competed for a few more years on the national team until I finally did retire. So I did make the right decision, and I think that the response I got from my team was the wrong response, and I can't do anything about that. And that's not something I've ever really said super candidly. But the way that I was treated because I chose to get surgery, it was like, that's like the stuff that no one talks. A lot of athletes, I mean, unless you watch documentaries like The Weight of Gold or Athlete A or whatever, unless you watch that stuff, you don't really see the politics in sports. All people mostly see is like every 4 years, people are doing these
Showing
inspiring things.
Right,
but
right.
it's like,
It's a lot going on.
for us, it's like day in and day out, and it's people and it's politics and it's playing the game and all that.
Right. So how in the hell could your team give you backlash or just be non-supportive when you're going through such difficult time?
I mean, I think, I can't, they'd probably tell you whatever. I guess all I can say is, at the end of the day, and what I've learned through that experience and also just social media, if you spend any time on social media and if you have opinion about anything, you see like, oh, people are just people.
Right.
People are just people. And when people are behind a screen, they become more brave about their opinions and less accountable for their sources and less accountable for their behavior. And looking back, I guess all I can say is, I think that I just bruised some egos not following their advice, and they were wrong.
So you don't regret that?
I don't regret it. How can I regret it? Like, to this day, this injury is not... I have a lot of chronic body issues from years of wrestling. That injury is not an injury I still deal with. I don't rehab that injury. The most I have is some tightness around my collarbone, but most people that never competed in sports have that.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's surgery. That's like part of it.
Right.
I've had like no issues with that injury. I mean, I had that surgery in 2013. We're going on 10 years.
Right.
And so, but I have other injuries.
Like what?
Like I have, degenerative disc disease, which is pretty common with wrestlers. I have a lot of neck issues. I have a lot of lower back issues. That's very common with wrestlers. I know wrestlers 5-10 years younger than me that have had double hip surgery and that have had neck surgery and that have their careers ended because they had too many concussions. I mean, there's like, I have so between my neck and my lower back, it's like I have enough where I actually still see a chiropractor once or twice a week. I still get dry needling done and tissue work, and I still do rehab every day because I have like chronic pain from years of this. But that surgery, like I have no issues with that. It's just, and there's no like prize or,
Right.
There's no return on investment, I guess ROI. I'm like, what did I, like, isn't that what they called that?
Yeah.
There's no return for being right. It's, you just know. And that's what it is, right? That's like what so many things are these days. In a digital era, you kind of just have to know where you stand on stuff.
Right.
So,
Good. Well, I'm happy you pushed through that
yeah.
and move on with your life. Now, you did meet the president,
I've met 2 presidents, actually.
right? And you did meet Michelle Obama.
Yes.
How was that experience for you?
It was awesome. Like, I've met Michelle Obama 3 times, and the 3rd time she acted like she recognized me, so who knows? I mean, I guess when you meet people as much as the former First Lady does, like, you kind of, I don't know, you assume you've met everyone, but
Right.
it felt special. Going to the White House, so it's like tradition to, like, if you make a U.S. Olympic team, I don't really know the details, but basically all USA athletes have the opportunity to meet, like, they have the opportunity to go to the White House.
Right.
And I know in 2016, quite a few athletes went, and then it's really ironic that 2020 Olympics were delayed because, I mean, I don't know that a lot of the athletes would have gone. You know, it was delayed to 2021.
Right.
But when I went, because so after the Olympics, every year we have a world championships. And after the Olympics, like a month or 2 later, there's a world championships. And I would have competed. I would have tried to compete in that, but I was so injured that I was training and trying to, but my injury had gotten so bad that, and this is before the surgery, I opted out, and I had actually missed the deadline to go to the White House. And it's ironic that you bring this up because my Facebook brought up a memory of me saying, thanks so much to the USOC for making this happen. And it was because I had missed the deadline because I thought I was going to compete, but there was no way with my collarbone. And so after the deadline, last minute, they managed to get my ticket, get me a room, and I was able to go. I wasn't even planning on going. It was very last minute. So I flew in later than all the other USA athletes. The whole event was held outside when we actually shook their hand, which is different now. I think they do it indoors now. And I remember Jordan Burroughs was in front of me in line, and he's like the face of wrestling. And smartphones weren't what they are now. They don't, you know. And I remember, I don't know if he's ever shared this story, so I don't know if this is like off limits, but whatever. I remember he was like, so you kind of had to ask people to take pictures for you. And I had a crappy phone. It was like crappy. And so I was like, there's no point in asking anyone. I don't even know if I'll get a good picture, which is so stupid looking back. But he had asked me to take his picture, and he's like, you have 1 shot. And I was so nervous because he had just won a gold medal in London. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Right.
So he went, and I took his picture. And it was a great picture, by the way. If you look up Jordan Burroughs, I took that picture. And then I went and I shook President Obama's hand, and then I shook Vice President Joe Biden's hand, and Michelle Obama was there. And then like a month later, my dietitian from the training center, she had gotten a job offer to work for a pro baseball team. So she like left the Olympic movement, which happens a lot. There's a lot of great people that leave and they go pro. It's better money and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And she sent me these pictures. She's like, I thought you'd like these. She took pictures of me. So like, I actually didn't plan that. I was winging it. Like we were a pre-social media era for, you know, all whatever.
Right.
And so I was so grateful to have those images because that was like such a cool experience. I met some other politicians that now that I actually pay attention to that stuff, I'm like, I actually could have been fine without meeting you ever.
Right.
But it was like a very cool opportunity to meet them. So, I mean, to meet a president in your lifetime is awesome. To meet 2, I feel like super, super lucky and honored.
Right.
to have met both of them.
And you didn't take pictures with both of them.
I didn't take any, but I got pictures. I have pictures of me shaking President Joe Biden's hand. I have pictures shaking former President Barack Obama's hand. And I have tons of pictures with Michelle Obama. So,
Do you regret meeting Obama or Biden looking back now?
no, not at all.
Okay.
I'm so grateful. It's like I have framed the pictures and they're like in my living room, and I'm like
Super proud.
I'm so proud of that experience. That's like, I almost look at that as more unique and incredible than going to the Olympics. It's weird because, like, I mean, they're kind of in the same, like, category, I guess, because they're both difficult and nearly impossible to do, I guess.
Right.
But, when you look at whether it's a politician or not, and whether you respect every decision they make or not, when you look up to somebody, to get to meet them and shake their hand is incredible,
Right,
And
right.
so that goes for anybody that looks up to anybody. I mean, you can look up to anybody. It doesn't matter what other people think. Like, that's your moment to, like, shake hands with someone you look up to. And
Right.
so I was really grateful to have that opportunity. It wasn't even supposed to happen, and it did. And so, yeah, it was.
That's pretty cool.
It was
That's
awesome.
a pretty good highlight
Yeah,
for your career.
yeah.
How did you support yourself when you was going through the whole wrestling thing?
Most of my career, I worked like a traditional job. I worked, and actually, this is something I bring up more now. During my career, I think I was embarrassed or more ashamed, I guess.
You was doing a sandwich thing?
I had a lot of different jobs. Like, literally,
Okay.
I had a lot of jobs. Do you remember a couple years ago when that former TV star was, like, bagging groceries and someone took a picture of him? Do you remember that? It was on social media, and he was, like, shamed. And then he got, like, a lot of public support. I don't remember his name, but I remember when that happened. It hit me so personally because I think that was like 2015 or 14.
I don't recall.
It was a while ago.
Yeah, I don't recall.
And when it happened, I was working at Starbucks. I will never forget it because the house I was renting from this wrestling family, they were giving me like a crazy good discount because I couldn't afford anything because
Right.
you don't make any money as an Olympic athlete.
Right.
And I was working at Starbucks. I was working full time. So I would work like 4:30 a.m. till whenever my shift ended. And then I would go straight to practice. And then I would take a break and I'd go to practice again. And there were times where I had two jobs. And this was like 90% of my career. I did not stop working a traditional job until like 2018, I'll say. I retired in 2021. During the pandemic, I retired. So that, just to give you an idea, like almost my entire career, I was just working to earn money.
But you're working to earn money, and then at the same time, you got to stay focused and healthy for the Olympics.
Right.
How did you create that balance and not exhaust yourself in the process?
Well, I think, depending on who you're talking to, this is definitely, I don't know how else to say it because it's not the position I'm in now. So I wouldn't even be able to speak on it if I hadn't experienced it. But when you don't have options, your options are very simple. When you don't have parents that are paying for college, when you don't have, like, most of my life, I didn't have health insurance. Most of my life.
Wow.
Most of my life, I just didn't have a backup plan or anything, a security, anything. I didn't have anything to fall back on. So before I graduated high school, I was living on my own. There were many couches. And I was talking to someone recently. Like, I've never actually been homeless, but I've come pretty close. And I have family members that have been homeless. So it's not a subject that I bring up lightly. But I've never lived on the street. I mean, but I will say this. I've like checked into like cheap motels. Like it got to that point. It wasn't like I'm sleeping in my car, but I mean, it got pretty close. And when you're in that point, and you don't have the option of like family money or whatever.
Can't tap into nothing.
There's nothing to tap into. There's no one to call. There's nobody. You get a job and you work and you figure it out, and that's it. And it's very simple. And that's so for my career. It was like I started wrestling in an era where it wasn't really about your shoe sponsor or your like endorsement. And the people that got endorsements were already Olympic champions. Like, just being a great athlete or being on a national team didn't get you an endorsement. Like, now, I have a great pitch that can get me sponsors. I don't even have to do any. I've gotten sponsors now just because the world has changed, and I know how to pitch myself. But back then, I remember someone telling me, "Yeah, we can talk about maybe writing a memoir once you've won a medal." I'm like, do you understand what it takes just to make an Olympic team? But you're like telling me I can't write a transcript without a medal, and I'm literally writing a book right now. So like the world,
insult.
The world, yeah, the world has changed, and it is kind of insulting. But back then, it wasn't insulting. That was just reality. Being a woman, being mixed race, I was the only female at ASU. I mean, it wasn't like there wasn't momentum. You were like breaking down a wall every time you did something. So there was no, oh, like we knew you were coming, so we have this for you. Like,
right.
So it was I was just fighting such a different battle than what. And so you know, I say I did work most of my career because I had to, and then near the end, the industry and being an athlete changed, and the world changed, and it got so competitive that I was like, I just need sponsors. So I got tons of sponsors. I really perfected my craft and my pitch, and I found a way to get sponsors so that I didn't have to work because, you know, the people I was competing against, they weren't working. I knew they weren't working. I was always the underdog, and I knew they were getting that #1 pay, right? So I was like, I have to find a way to just be able to train. So around 2018, I believe that was when I finally put in my 2-week notice at Starbucks. But I'd worked many jobs leading up to that, you know? And so to answer your question, like, I had sponsors through the years, but the majority of my income came from just working. I mean, even after I made the London team and I was #1 in the U.S., I interned at eBay for 9.
That's pretty cool.
It was awesome for 9 or 10 months, and it was awesome in hindsight. Actually, it was very difficult going through it. And I made more in 2 weeks because I was an MBA student. I made more in 2 weeks as an intern than I did in a month as the #1 athlete in the U.S. So, and that was something I was really vocal about because people still, like, to this day, people still think I was paid by the government. And I'm like, no.
Because you was an Olympian.
Yeah, like, people just are very misguided about what it's like. And that's why when I worked at Starbucks, and that's why I brought up that TV actor, because when I worked at Starbucks, this high school kid that came in that I trained with a lot back then, it was his family that I rented my house from. I remember him posting a picture on Instagram. He's in college now, and he's like a stellar athlete.
Wow.
So that's why I'm like not naming his name. But he was like, in his post, I mean, I remember it all so clearly. It said, saw one of my favorite wrestlers today at Starbucks. And I'm like in my getup, right? And it was a very hard lifestyle, but it's not like I was ashamed of it. I had always worked my whole life. I had never known a 2-income family. Wow. Like, I never knew that.
Wow.
So, like, I always knew what it was like to just have to work. And my life had always been a grind. How did you do it? Well, I didn't know anything different. But he posted it on Instagram, and I remember he tagged me, and somebody commented, I don't know who they were, and they were like, if she's so awesome, why is she working at Starbucks? And this was like after I went to the Olympics.
Wow.
I already made the London team, but like people, and this is just how humans are, especially Americans. Like, we just assume, well, if you're doing this, like, you should be this. You should have this. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure you make more than I do, and I'm the #1 athlete in the country, in the world. And you're super inspired every 4 years, but that's not paying my bills, you know?
Still got to go out there and make it happen.
Yeah, so, like, that was the first time I had ever been, someone had, like, attempted to shame me. And I did go through a period of, like, shame. You know, I remember I was dating a guy at the time, and I was, like, embarrassed by it. And it, like, actually impacted our relationship a lot, because I was, like, I remember at the time I was, like, selling plasma to help, like, fill my gas tank. And I was so ashamed to talk about this stuff. I was so embarrassed, because I was like, I'm doing an honest day's work and I'm being shamed. How can I talk about these things? Some high school kid did that to me. And, like, I'm a human, you know, and I had already gone through a lot of, like, adversity in my life, like real adversity.
Right.
And so, that strained our relationship a lot, because I wasn't honest about what I was going through. I remember getting a grant from the Women's Sports Foundation, and in my, when I was writing my essay to, like, get this grant, and at that time I was literally living paycheck to paycheck, plus, like, donating plasma, and other things. I was, like, selling, like, pictures and, like, shoes on eBay. Like, I was, like, scraping to, like, pay my bill. I mean, it was, like, and it was just a hard time, you know. And I remember the Women's Sports Foundation, they wanted me to speak. They were so moved by my story, because I had been very honest. But I was like, I don't know if I want to talk about. It was, like, super hard for me to talk about that stuff in front of those people. Like,
You wasn't proud of it.
I wasn't. Shame is, like, a really crazy thing. It's one thing to say, I'm not proud of this, or I'm not proud of you, but to be like, I'm ashamed, like, I think that's, when we're talking about all the things going on in the world right now, the relevant issues in the world, shame is probably, I would argue, I don't have proof of this, this is my opinion, I would argue that shame is the #1 reason why people don't talk more about real things that they struggle with.
Wow.
Shame is why people don't talk about why they're suicidal. Shame is why people don't talk about mental health. Shame is why people don't talk about how they need help from the government, or why they can't take care of their kids, or why they have addictions, or why they're homeless, or it's shame. It's
But you've been down that road. So
yeah.
What would you say to people who's going through that right now?
Well, we're in an era now where there's platforms to speak. We have not arrived by any means, but I think it's not so much telling people you just need to speak up, because I learned at a young age to not speak up. You just learn when you want to talk and when you don't. You don't have to live a lot of life to know when you're comfortable talking about stuff.
Right.
But I think openness breeds openness. And even in my relationship now, my partner, like, he understands mental health a little bit, but really I push myself to be vulnerable with him, because not so much that he'll, like, empathize with me, but so that when he comes across somebody else, or he sees something in the media, he understands, like, no, I know what this looks like in real time. So there's things that I share with him and I talk to him about that are hard, that I'm like, I'm not telling you this so you'll feel bad for me. I'm telling you so that when you see something online, or you see somebody talk about something after 30 years, you don't judge her. You realize, yeah, 30 years didn't feel like 30 years to them. 30 years felt like a day, and it's still hard for them to talk about. And to just be slow to speak, right? And quick to listen. And so I think that It's a lot of layers, and it's a mixed bag. I don't know that. I work with a lot of youth too, and I volunteer a lot, and I will say that. And I studied criminal justice. I switched degrees in college, but I'm still like embarrassingly obsessed with the study of criminology, and I just watch way too much crime TV. But I do think that what I found in my experience is that you will never, ever convince anyone to talk. All you can do is wait and be patient and inspire them with your openness. And then when people are open, just shut your mouth and listen. And, you know, I've even seen people write things and say things like, I understand what they're going through, but I don't agree. And I'm like, you know, if you really understood, you wouldn't even say that, because understanding means it doesn't matter if you agree. Because that's what empathy is. Empathy is like, it doesn't matter if you agree. Empathy is you just shut your mouth and let them talk and go through the process. And you are just there setting an example as somebody who is listening.
Right.
You know,
Right.
when
Showing that support.
yeah, you know, like I had retired when Simone Biles came forward with her, you know, mental health struggles, and there's been a lot of other athletes. And I remember in 2012 taking a picture with all the female gymnasts, and I'm not proud of this, but I remember telling like 2 or 3 people, I was like, yeah, they weren't very friendly. They're like America's sweethearts, and then later we find out about Nassar. That was like a learning curve for me. You know, it's quick to forget. It's really easy to forget.
Right.
You know, and then looking back, I mean, I have these pictures, and I'm like, of course they weren't friendly. They had a predator that was being enabled by their NGB. I mean, like, so I mean, there, like I
You
said,
destroy a lot of lives.
there's so many lives, but you realize, you know, and then people are so, you know, you have people saying like, man, Simone is so, like, you have people saying things that you're like, you have no clue what you're talking about.
Nah, Simone is a fucking hero in my book.
She is, but I've literally seen athletes of color, athletes that have struggled with mental health publicly, athletes that have struggled with adversity publicly, athletes that I've seen go from like nobodies with 20 followers to like their MMA fighters say, I don't agree with what she did. And I'm like, you really forgot. You really forgot.
Right.
You just need to like shut your mouth and listen, you know? So,
She's a hero.
she is.
In my book. I watched her way back. I think it was in 2004 or something like that. But she's a hero. So how did you help yourself?
You're the best.
How did you deal with sexism and racism? How did that play a role?
You know, it's really interesting. I wasn't even super aware of, I had like less than a handful of what I acknowledge as racist experiences growing up. My experiences with race were they were different because I'm light-skinned, but, you know, I have features and my hair, and there's like certain things about me that are very obviously, like, we'll say ethnic, whatever. Like that's what they're putting on the shampoo bottles now. Ethnic hair. Like, yay, we've come so far. But I remember growing up not seeing anyone that looked like me. I mean, there were either black people or white people.
Right.
And I've spoken on this a lot too, and I actually just read her memoir recently. Mariah Carey was like my idol because I always had a sense, it was different. I say this a lot, but it was different back then. Like, I couldn't just Google and see like, oh, is she mixed? I just always had a sense that like she was somebody I could relate to. But there wasn't anybody on TV that looked like me. I mean, I had to have a really strong imagination. But as far as being a female, that was something I ran into a lot just being a wrestler.
Right.
In high school, in college, in the opportunities following college, in getting paid by my sponsors. I mean, I had hard talks and hard meetings, and I went like head to head with people. And, you do that enough and you finally realize your worth. And now I say it, you know, candidly, but this was like years in the making. And now, you know, when athletes ask for my advice, I'm like, I give them input, like you have to advocate for yourself. You have to. But as far as race, I think it was something that I saw more in hindsight. And the race issues that I experienced were more, it wasn't so much that people were racist to me. Most of my friends growing up were white people. I grew up in Milwaukee, Oregon. And Oregon is awesome. It's a very culturally liberal. I mean, they literally hug trees. I mean, we were recycling there, and when I moved to Arizona, you had to pay to recycle. I mean, we were just like ahead of the game. We were just like, I was so proud. I'm still proud to have grown up in Oregon. I love Oregon. But as far as race, most of my insecurities about race came from the fact that, like, I didn't have hair like my friends, and my mom's white, and I was raised by my mom, and I wasn't taught how to deal with that. I mean, you know, she was dealing with her own stuff, and she was not even present to help me deal with that. And so there were just like a lot of things I just figured out on my own.
Did your friends treat you different?
You know, I'm gonna assume maybe on some level they did. There were I felt like growing up, I always felt different, and some of that was mental health stuff that I didn't realize till later, and some of it was, I think there's just a lot that happens in hindsight. There's a lot of revelations that happen in hindsight. And because of the eras that I live, I mean, I'm a millennial. Like, I was born in the 80s. I grew up in the 90s, and now it's 2020, you know, and it's like, I mean, you see social media come to life, which has impacted everybody's perception of reality. It just has. And I think growing up, you know, I just worked so hard. I wanted bone straight hair and a tan and straight teeth, and I wanted a smaller nose, and I wanted better eyebrows, and I wanted all the things that didn't come with being half Jamaican, like, basically.
Hey, we love Jamaicans.
Oh, yeah, we do. We do.
You guys are the best. You understand what I'm saying? I love Jamaicans. Now, a lot of these insecurities, were you ever a victim of abuse in any form or fashion?
So growing up, one thing that I think had a profound impact on me growing up was just, I don't even know how to categorize it, but I'll just say that I didn't really have any type of parental, like, I was raised by my mom, and she was not present. My grandparents were very involved. It was one of those things.
Where were your dad? What was your dad?
He was in Alaska. I was born in Alaska. And my dad, you know, my dad and I are very similar, and actually we're really close now. We're so, I mean, that's just DNA, though, because I didn't grow up with him, but we've talked about this. Like, my dad came here as a legal immigrant. Like, he, you know, and coming from Jamaica, if you talk to any Jamaicans, like, you know, in spite of what people think, a lot of people that come here from other countries will work any job, and they will keep their head down, and they will never talk back. My dad, and this was also something I was ashamed of for many years, but my dad was a janitor for the Anchorage School District for many decades,
Wow.
like decades.
Wow.
And now he has a great pension, and he's like, and we've talked about this, because he's like, he was just trying to survive. Like, when my parents divorced, it was ugly. It was like the worst of the worst. And so, like, he was like, he said, like, I wasn't picky, and I wasn't thinking about retirement or benefits. Like, now he's living a life that, as a Jamaican-born man that like literally grew up in a hut, like a dirt floor hut. You don't think about medical. Like, I take him to the dentist, and he has coverage. Like, it's crazy, you know? He visits me.
You're not used to that, right? He wasn't used to that.
Yeah, so, like, anyways, that's a little off topic. But, so I didn't grow up with him, but I grew up with my mom, and she had a lot of mental health issues, and I was very bitter towards her because I was acutely aware that I remember growing up thinking, like, it's like, I can't go anywhere with her. I can't bring people here. I don't know how to act around people. I don't even know what normal is.
Were you embarrassed of your mom?
Super embarrassed. But that was my normal. You know, like, you know, I would, like, sitting down for a family dinner was literally, when I was younger, like in high school, that's literally something I only saw on TV. Like, only.
You never had family
My
dinner?
entire family was, like, so dysfunctional on that side. So dysfunctional. I mean, there's so many stories. And if I'm not saying more, it's more out of respect for these people. But it was so dysfunctional. And I remember being at school. I was close to all the school counselors. It's funny back then, because I look back and I'm like, well, I'm not actually embarrassed about it anymore, but I look back and I'm like, dang, like, I actually, like, was very close to all my school counselors. We're all friends on Facebook. Like, all of them, not just one of them, like, literally, like, all 7 of them were like, I spent time in their offices, like, time, you know? Yeah,
real time. Did you have a stepfather?
No. I mean, my mom had people over. But there was a lot of mental health issues, and there are things I'm sure she grew up with that she never spoke of. And I had a lot of resentment, and
where did the resentment and the anger and not just angry, not just frustration, not just feeling like my mom is my mom, she's going through a lot of mental stuff, but it had to affect you to the point where you became dysfunctional.
Yeah. That's so funny you say that. And there's like a couple of things I want to address with that. You know, I was watching a show recently, and there was a quote in it that said, back then, people were working so much they didn't have time for mental health. No one was depressed because they were working. And I was like, I can see how that would be appealing to today's viewers, but that's not true. I always struggled with mental health, but I was working so much that I couldn't deal with it because it never went away, right? And I look at my mom, and, you know, I think mental health is a little bit, I don't think it's man-made, but I do think that we just, as a country, we don't address it effectively, and that's why nothing changes, and that's why people just go to jail or they're just medicated, and we just don't address this stuff accurately, in my opinion. But I didn't. It's weird because there are other family members. I'm gonna leave that vague, but I have family members. I've spoken about this with my dad and my mom frequently. I have family members that I would not be surprised if they were, like, sociopaths, and they were, like, I would not be surprised. I know enough about criminology to not be surprised by that.
So you did see some signs.
Oh, yeah, I saw a lot of stuff. I saw a lot growing up. But because mental health was not a phrase, I never spoke openly about my own struggles until 2016. And I remember it very clearly. The first time I was ever able to speak up about it around other athletes and not be judged or criticized, I remember, because before that I had been told not to do that in front of other people. I'd literally been instructed, do not show this in front of other athletes. So, you know...
You never asked why? I mean, we know why, but did you ever ask why?
I mean, think about it. If you're growing up in the 1800s and someone says, well, this is the only way to... Like, women can't vote. As a woman, you don't ask why. That's just how it is. Until an outlier comes, right? So that seems obvious. Why didn't you ask why? Well, how would I have known? I was a child. Like, you know what I mean? And I was so young. Like, I'm not saying it's a good excuse. I'm just saying that was the reality. But I will say, growing up, I knew, and I don't know why, and this is why I always say this is why I believe in God, because there was a couple of things that happened to me when I was young that that made me believe in God. Number one, because I wrote music and I was a singer, and I would just get inspired with songs, and I remember I was like 6 years old, and I remember thinking, you don't just get songs like this unless God is real. Like, and I remember having a moment, you know. But the second thing is, I knew, and the dice fall. It falls like some people grow up the way I grew up and they become bad people. But I was like, I don't want to be anything like what I saw. I don't want to be anything like that. And I knew I struggled with depression. I've always known that. I didn't know about anxiety until later because I didn't know that was a thing.
What age?
I mean, I have journals from when I was in middle school. My grandma used to buy me journals. I think she just had an intuition that I like to write stuff down. So I have journals from like, it's crazy. Like, I don't know. I don't know if anyone will ever see those. But like, I have journals from when I was like 11, 12, you know, and some of them are like on paper that I still have, and some of them are digital that I've just kept.
So what was one of the most traumatic experience you faced at that time that you can recall?
I mean, there was a family member that, you know, and I have like really, it's weird because this is something I've been doing what's called shadow work. If you don't know what that is, just look it up. I'm not going to get into it. That's a whole nother podcast. And you don't have to necessarily be like hokey or wonky to like, it's like doing yoga. You don't have to believe in the religion to do the stretch, right? So, but there's like some experiences I had growing up where I was, what's the word? It's like brainwashed, but it's groomed almost. Like I have some really severe like insecurities and self-deprecating tendencies, but I do have talents, so it doesn't make sense to people. Like, why don't you just and like I've been doing this shadow work, and I realized like, you know, I have some really fragmented memories of being like told that like I was basically like I answered to this person, right? It's fragmented though, so I don't have like a lot of solid. And then this is stuff like literally just recently I've been kind of like addressing. And then also, you know, I remember being in school and getting called to the office and being like, your mom is, you know, she's threatening to commit suicide and the police are with her. And I was like,
was there drug and alcohol in your home?
No. My mom didn't do, and I'm only sharing this because this is like, I mean, you could like literally, like this was school. Like this wasn't even like some private record. There's things I would rather not share, but like this stuff was like, there wasn't, my mom had an incident in high school where she got in a car accident. I believe she was inebriated, and she had to relearn how to walk and talk, and my mom was adopted and her two sisters. So my grandparents aren't actually biological, but I consider them my grandparents. So there's like layers to that, right? But everybody tells me, even my mom's childhood best friend is like, if you're ever ready to like hear the whole story, call me. And I haven't called her yet. It's interesting. I have not even thought about it until right now.
Are you going to make that call soon?
I'm going to make the call, but it's hard because if you're going to open that door, you have to be ready. And I'm not on anyone's timeline but my own, right? So, but I share all this because, you know, I had a lot of resentment towards my mom because growing up, not knowing the terminology, I just was like, my mom's crazy and she's ruining my life. And there were so many situations where it was like, you know, if you're raised by somebody that's like bipolar and depressed and all these things, but not getting treated for it, and it's not spoken about candidly in any circle, like even scholastically, like imagine what that's like for a child who you just, first of all, you learn to like navigate, and you learn how to have conversations with people, to like explain yourself. And you realize early on, like, I don't even know how I don't, all these social skills that you're supposed to learn growing up, I didn't learn them growing up. Like most of what I learned, I don't even know, like I learned studying
Naturally.
I studied the Grammys, and like I looked up to Mariah Carey and Britney Spears. So like I like didn't learn that from family members, you know? And then my grandparents lived through the Depression, so they didn't show any emotion ever.
So you was raised by your grandma.
I wasn't raised by my grandma, but I kind of was. And it was just that situation where I was raised by my mom, but my grandparents were really involved. But this is a really fun fact that I've actually shared with quite a few people, but not ever on a podcast. But my grandpa, again, not biological, but my grandpa, so my grandparents are Bob and Jewel Bundy. And my grandpa is
Bundy?
Actually related.
Bundy?
Related.
The Bundy.
Yeah.
The fucking Bundy.
The Ted Bundy, yeah. So it's interesting because, it's funny because growing up, I always thought it was like a, I know, right? People are like,
What the fuck did you just say?
So growing up, I always thought it was like a really weird irony because you had Married with Children on TV. I just thought it was a common name. My last name's Campbell. Like, my dad's Jamaican. Like, a lot of people have the last name. I just thought it was an irony, right? Mm-hmm. And my grandparents have passed away, but my grandpa was always, he was a good man. He's a good man. But there were certain characteristics about him that I didn't understand, that seemed I didn't get. And in 2000, this is how new some of these revelations have been for me, the stuff that I'm talking about right now. This is how new it's been. And I need to remind you, they were not biological, okay? You don't have, like, the seed of Ted Bundy sitting here. Like, okay, I've studied Ted Bundy like extensively. Like, I'm very familiar with the horridness of his crimes, and his psych as much as you can be. But in 2017, my dad was visiting, and my mom had moved to Arizona. My mom was like kind of homeless off and on, but they were both at my house Christmas that year. It was weird because I can't even remember another time where my parents were in the same house and we were like laughing about stuff. But it was such a weird evening because we were all there, and I think I had finally kind of gotten to a place where I could pay my bills, and I was like fully sponsored, and I had finally gotten to a place that I had worked so hard for so long. Mm-hmm. And two things came up when they were both at my house.
Okay.
And one of them was, there was a particular family member that I joked about, and I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if the police showed up one day and was like, so and so is responsible for like 19 murders, and I was half joking, but both of my parents, they have been divorced forever. And they both have their own issues and baggage, and they're like, yeah. Like, I was half joking, but like, you know when you have an instinct about people, but then someone else who knows is like, actually, you're right.
Serious shit.
Yeah. So that was that family member. And the other thing was the Ted Bundy thing. And I don't know how it came up, but I remember saying, we were talking about it, and my dad was like, no, yeah, like in his very strong Jamaican accent, he was like, yeah, no, they were never proud about it, but yeah, that's, and I was like, wait a second. Wait, he's really related to him? And my dad was like, yeah, like they didn't really like to talk about it. And I was like, it was like mind blowing to me because nobody, this was, I'm 36. This was 2017-ish. So it was like about 4-ish years ago. I mean, 4-ish years ago, I realized this wasn't just like an assumption I made. This was real. And I was like shook a little bit, but then I was kind of like enamored by it because I've always been kind of enamored by criminology, and I just became obsessed with knowing more. But, you know, he had a really awful childhood. I mean, he had an awful childhood. I'm not excusing what he's done to people, but, you know, when you have the childhood I had and then you realize, oh, I am truly 3 to 6 degrees away from and then like my fiance is related to President Nixon. Like when you have those types of degrees in your life, you just, I know, you're like, you want to leave now? Cause I don't need this kind of energy here. No, but when you realize you have these types of connections with these types of people.
Tricky dick.
It's not that, I know, right? It's not that I'm telling you, I am very staunch about my stance on like predators and criminals and pedophiles and all that. I don't believe in the death penalty, and I do believe,
even for pedophiles,
I do believe that there needs to be consequences, and I do believe that some crimes, from what I know and from what I've studied extensively, like outside of Wikipedia, like I know that there are some crimes, as far as we know scientifically, that there is no repentance. There is no, I'm rehabilitated from that. I've seen enough, like up close, to know that I don't believe in the death penalty. I have my reasons for that. We'll get into that in a second if you choose. But because I believe that in the U.S. specifically, like, we just approach crime completely backwards and we don't do it right. Because there are crimes that can be rehabilitated, but unfortunately we just send people to jail and they come out truly as criminals. And I just feel like in the U.S. we don't do it correctly. We don't do it effectively. As far as like pedophiles and predators, I'm not totally convinced that, like, if it were up to me as just a random civilian, I would say, you know, castrate them and send them all there's this island in Italy that used to be a prison island. I've been there, actually. Send them all there. You know, there's plenty of places. There's a lot of goats there and stuff, like.
So you think people who hurt children, probably kill children, should be castrated and shipped?
Yeah, you know, I'm saying that's a good suggestion, but for me to sit here and say, like, I believe that's the answer, that's fallible, and I don't think you should ever put information out there and say this is fact if it's not fact. But the reason I'm against the death penalty is because I don't believe it's effective. Obviously, you can put to death anybody that commits a crime, but it's expensive and it doesn't actually change crime or hinder crime. It just killed a person. But people die every day and crime continues.
Yeah, but they're holding people accountable for their action. They're actually
Right.
saying what you did was so heinous,
Right.
was so inhumane,
Right.
that
You deserve this. Right.
this is the only way acceptable for an individual who commits
Right.
certain acts in society.
And, you know, like, I'm not necessarily saying, you know, this is just kind of where the place I've come to personally. And I'm a person that has experienced a lot of trauma. You know, it's not like, but even in the things I've experienced, I wouldn't be healed if certain people died. I would be healed if they changed.
All right, let me ask you this,
You know?
since your perspective is on that. If you had a child, do you have a child?
No. My fiance has children.
If you had a child and your child was a victim by the hands of someone,
Predator. Yeah.
would your answer be the same?
I don't know. But you know what? I'm going to promise you right here on record that when I have a child, I will, you can ask me again. And maybe it'll be a different answer. I'm not going to sit here and act like I've never had children. I want to have children. I love children. I mean, I love kids. I do. And I've actually been faced with situations, really weird, sketchy situations where I had to be the responsible, like, adult and, like, this isn't okay just because you trust me, right?
Right.
So I'm not answering as, like, no, like, trust God, whatever. Like,
Trust the process.
I'm not, like, thoughts and prayers. I'm not, like, saying that. And I'm a person of faith, but that's not a question I can answer without children. I can only answer where I'm at right now. As somebody that was a child and somebody that is an adult, I truly believe, and I have seen children I've mentored, children I have coached. I have known athletes, peers, literally that have been, like, abused and assaulted by coaches. Literally, I've had friends and teammates come to me and say, can you report this to Safe Sport? Safe Sport is kind of like the police of athletics. I don't know how much you know about Safe Sport, but I've literally reported things to Safe Sport on behalf of other people. I mean, I've not just my own experiences, but I have seen things, and I really do believe, yes, there has to be consequences. The fact that I don't necessarily support the death penalty doesn't mean I don't believe in consequences, because I do.
Were you coached by a male?
You know what's interesting is I've been coached predominantly, I would say like 90% males. And what's weird, this is what's really weird. There's a couple coaches I've had that have a really questionable history that for whatever reason, and I'm telling you, it's really wild. Because there were some moments in my life where I was broke and I needed help. And that's who gets preyed on, right? Like, I was like a textbook.
Very vulnerable.
I was very vulnerable. And there was a couple times in my career where I was helped by some of these coaches, and I was never victimized. And I mean, I'm telling you, like, point blank. And I've talked to athletes that were these coaches' athletes. I mean, these are things I've addressed. Like, and I'm like, it's wild to me because I'm like, that wasn't my experience, and I don't know why.
With the same individual.
Same individual.
What was the difference between you and them?
I don't know. I don't know. And I am a strong personality now, but in those moments when I look back, I'm like, no, I was not a person that would have talked about this back then. Did
you encourage them to go report it? Did you encourage them to do something about it?
Yes. Since now I do. And even now, I've actually been told by multiple teammates and peers that I should step into an official role because I am so unapologetic and I'm not necessarily afraid of, just go on Twitter, I get like a lot of, people are mean. People are really, really horrible on social media. And it does hurt sometimes because I'm coming from a place of experience, not of being a snowflake or whatever you want to call people like me or whatever. I don't even identify with a party. I'm very open-minded. I'm culturally liberal, and I do believe that people should make their own choices medically. I believe in certain things, but I still think you have the right to choose what you do to your own body.
So you're culturally liberal.
Yeah.
So you believe in abortion.
No, that's not what culturally liberal means. Culturally liberal, when I say culturally liberal, I mean, I believe that people should be able to live the way they choose to live if they're not harming people or themselves.
But people that's harming babies, abortion, they believe they're not harming themselves.
So in terms of abortion, and I'm like, I don't know if you know this, I actually like got my degree in world religion. So I've studied all of the major world religions. I've read the Bible probably probably 25 times in multiple versions and translations. And I don't say that as a flex. I say that as I'm textbook educated, but I'm also personally educated.
So what's your stand?
So in terms of abortion, I don't necessarily believe that you should be able to kill a baby. I do believe that as an individual, you should have the right to make your own decisions. Now, like medically, I don't believe that anybody should tell you what decisions you make medically.
That's a contradictory. You got to explain that.
Okay, so for example, let's say you're the governor of Arizona and I am a woman and I am pregnant. And we won't get into why I'm pregnant. You don't know why I'm pregnant. I don't believe you have enough experience. I don't believe there's anything about you that gives you the right to tell me what I do with my body. Now, if we want to get into at what point you're pregnant or whatever, like that's not a conversation I am even prepared to have right now. Like, oh, what about 6 weeks versus 12 weeks versus, Wade versus Roe? Because my fiance, he has very different political views than I have. And we have pretty similar views on abortion, but in his previous marriage, he's divorced now, his ex-wife had an abortion and she did not, it was early, but she did not consider his input. And so he's very triggered by it, right? So we disagree on certain things, but not because he's religious, because of his experience, right?
Do you think he had that right to have known?
I think he had, I think if two people, it's tricky, because I think laws are tricky because we make laws because we assume everybody starts on the same starting line.
But she made the decision.
Right.
He helped create.
Right.
That automatically put him involved.
He was involved.
Both of them involved in that choice.
Right.
No, yes or no?
So I believe no one has the right to tell her what she does with her body. Okay?
Correct.
Correct.
However, if this individual you're saying has the right to make 100% decision with their body, I agree with that.
Right.
Under the circumstances that they made that baby by themselves.
Right.
But if you made that baby
with another person,
with somebody else, by default, you put them.
So it is my opinion. And here's the thing. This is my opinion. I don't believe this should be law. I don't believe my opinion should apply to the law that applies to the entire country. Right? Because here's the thing, the shark doesn't know the squirrel exists. Like, as Americans, we're a really arrogant country. And we really think, as Americans, as a Western society, we really think that our views, like, apply to everyone. Like, COVID is a conspiracy. But it's like, okay, like, you're like just an American that doesn't want to wear a mask walking into TGI Fridays. Like, you're just, you're like in Texas and you want to carry a gun. Whatever. Like, whatever. Like, we think that way as Americans, but if you're in another country, like, the whole way of thinking is different.
Right.
And I'm not saying other countries are better. I'm just saying, like, we have to put aside our personal projections, right? So, like, for example, I struggle with depression and anxiety, and I take medication for it. But I'm not telling you you have to. If you can manage it in a more holistic way, if you want to do psychedelics, if you want to do ayahuasca, I don't judge you. I've done it. I think people in prison should do ayahuasca. Like, I think that is a great way to address criminals. What I'm saying is, it is not my job to take my experiences and project them on legal mandates or law. But to circle back, I think in this situation, she got pregnant, and I feel for him, and I personally believe he had the right to have input on that decision. I think it was irresponsible for her to do that without his input. But part of the reason I think she did that without his input is cultural. She's Chinese, and I'm familiar with the Chinese culture. I've been there many, many times, and different cultures look at decision making differently, and you don't have to agree with it. You know what I mean? Like in the U.S., women have more rights than other countries, and other countries might look at us and be like, "Yeah, you have more rights, but you guys are like a mess." Like, you know, and depending on what we're talking about, they're right. And we can look at other countries and be like what the hell? Like you really got to go to an African village to get like this is crazy. You have to do that. Like that seems crazy. So it's like tomato. So I feel like, in my personal opinion, you know, you conceive of a child together. Do I think that the law should get involved with that? Well, you know, are we a Christian country? Does everyone in our country believe that our law should be religion based, which is kind of the motivation behind some of these laws? Or do I believe that, you know, if you're old enough to decide if you get a vaccine or not, if you're old enough to decide to drink alcohol or not, if you're old enough to drive or not, if you're old enough to carry a weapon or not, if you're old enough to vote or not, and you're a woman, why should some 50-year-old white guy that's a politician tell me what I'm allowed to do with my ovaries? So that's my
politics
right?
and government authorities and otherwise, in my opinion, should not be involved in human life decision, in my opinion, when it comes to a female body. However, on the other hand, I do believe strongly that when you make a responsible decision to be with somebody and create a life with somebody, or you know there's a possibility of creating a life with somebody, you do owe that person, to some degree, some form of courtesy and acknowledgement to say, you know, we did this together. Why should I individually make this choice to abort without your knowledge or awareness?
I agree. I actually completely agree. You know, I think, and I'm actually looking for when the laws in Texas were passed, I was mostly following, trying to figure out one thing I do with social media a lot is I try to see what the temperature of the room is. Like, what are people actually saying? And there was a couple stances, because I'm not an expert. I'm not a medical expert by any means. And I found a couple of really interesting posts that I'm just looking for, because I took a screenshot of them because I was like, this is actually informative, if nothing else. But while I'm looking for that, one thing I will say that was kind of eye-opening to me, you know, I mentioned earlier that I did a speaking tour in New York. And I had lived a very difficult, I had a lot of difficulties growing up. And, you know, some of that stuff I've talked about, and some of it I haven't talked about that I won't talk about today. But I don't know where they are, but that sucks. You know, you start to get used to living a certain way. It's very easy to forget. Like, I'll give a very basic example. I mean, I remember being in college and just, like, barely being able to afford toilet paper. I mean, I would steal toilet paper, like, when I'd go on a wrestling trip, which those were always paid for. I would, like, steal them from hotels or, like, restaurants I was at. I mean, that's where I was at. And then I moved to the Olympic Training Center, and I get free toilet paper, you know. And I lived there for about 5 years, and you just get used to free toilet paper. Now imagine getting free toilet paper for 5 years, free towels, a free bed, a free room. It's not free. I mean, I have to be a good athlete, and that's like my job.
You earned it.
Right? So it's not.
You earned it.
it's not free, but whatever.
Yeah.
I'm doing what I love, and a lot of people don't make money doing what they love. So I think that's what it is, right?
Yeah, the perks.
And imagine after 5 years of free toilet paper and bed sheets, going back into the real world and be like, oh shoot, I gotta buy toilet paper, and like you're not even used to budgeting that.
Right.
So I say that because I think a lot of people, they project and they live their lives and they formulate these opinions based on truly their experiences. I mean, if you get right down to it, like how many times you hear people say, like, even people of color are like, I just had to work hard and pull myself up by my bootstraps, and I didn't let racism get in the way. And people really, that is like their platform. And I'm not saying that's not true for you. Maybe as a person of color, that was not an obstacle for you. Maybe you just worked hard and you made it. But that is not everybody. The shark does not know the squirrel exists. You do not know the world outside of your world. So stop acting like you do. Have you traveled the world? I mean, I've seen a lot of the world because I was an athlete. And my dad grew, like I saw the hut he grew up in. And I'm not going to sit here and act like I know what it's like to grow up in Jamaica. You talk to someone from Jamaica, they don't even want to talk about it. My dad, most of what I know about my dad, I learned from other people. He didn't tell me.
Traumatizing for him.
It's like, and I met some people from, where's Rihanna from?
Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, I was at a tournament and I spoke to some people, and I was like, yeah, I don't know a lot just because my dad, and they laughed and they go, well, yeah, because people from Jamaica don't want to talk about it. They love it, but they don't want to talk about it because it's so poor. And it was just, these two men said it so matter-of-factly, like, so I say that because there was these moments in my life where I realized I had a very challenging childhood. I did, for sure. And I'm literally like coming to terms with it as an adult, but even I can recognize, and through reading and choosing to educate myself and choosing to be open-minded, that like, so for me, like, I didn't have health insurance for most of my life. So it is my personal opinion that, yeah, this should be available to people, because I struggled my whole life to get it. But I know kids that like, they were military brats, and I know kids that had 2-income households and they never struggled with it. And they're like, F welfare, F government. Like, they are so against it. And I'm like, yeah, but you never had to.
Privilege.
What if you didn't have to sell plasma to pay for a dentist appointment?
White privilege.
And it's not, and yeah, yes.
Yes.
White fragility.
White,
but
yeah.
it's not just white people.
Right.
It's just, it's projecting your life and assuming that, well, I know, like, because this was my life, so I mean, if I can do it, anyone can do it. Well, that's not true or accurate at all. I respect you. You overcame, but your life is not my life. You're a squirrel. I'm a shark. Whatever. Like, we never cross paths. You know?
Crazy.
And what's crazy is, I shared earlier, like, I was like, I worked so much growing up that I never really dealt with my mental health struggles. And as an adult, I'm addressing it. And it didn't go away just because I'm an adult. It was always there. I just never got to address it until now. First of all, I couldn't afford therapy. And secondly, I didn't have the time because I was working all the time, you know?
Right.
And so I think, like, and those aren't necessarily arguments or discussions I get into with people, but I think, you know, we can go back and forth all day long about, well, with abortion, like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? And I'm like,
yeah.
So I guess I'm saying all this because it's not that I disagree with you. This is what I'm saying. It doesn't matter if I disagree with you. You have the right to believe what you want. Just don't kill my baby. Don't tell me what to do with my body. That's because my experience, and the other thing I'm going to say on this, and this is really important because this was a light bulb moment for me, and this is why I kept bringing, like, the toilet paper and all that, right? when I did that speaking tour in New York, you know, you hear about, I saw where my dad grew up, and you hear about things in increments, right? And you like see things on TV, and you see like back then, like, and still, like, I don't really watch TV. I have like Netflix, so I don't see like commercials per se. But like, you remember those commercials where it would be like this, like, organization that's like, donate 10 cents a week and support this child. And so your idea of poverty was only like commercials and like music videos, and like it was only media. It was not
real life.
It wasn't really personal experience. And the people you knew with personal experience, I mean, they were your friends, so really on some level they probably didn't totally show you everything, because I know I didn't show people everything.
Of course.
Like, so like your whole perspective is jaded, and that's not your fault, but just be willing to like admit that like you haven't seen it all,
and shut
right?
the fuck up in the process,
right? So that's number one. Number two, when I did this, so I remember I had this cute speech that I used to give to every group I spoke to, and I had this really, because I was the underdog that made the Olympic team, and I beat the number one girl, and she had never I'd never beat her, and she was the favorite, and it was like, it was the miracle story, right?
You bust her ass though.
And I had this cool story, like, people are like, what was your favorite part? Meeting Kobe Bryant. And it was all this meeting the president, and blah, and like, I'm on the plane, and blah. So I'm in New York, and this speaking tour, it was hosted by Beat the Streets New York, which is this like awesome nonprofit organization, whatever. It's literally what it says, like you're saving kids from the streets. It's essentially what it does. They have them everywhere. But they picked like 7 or 8 schools for me to speak at over the course of like 2 or 3 days. And this is actually the same trip that I got my consult from my collarbone. This is a heavy trip. And I remember the first school I went to, I couldn't believe, I mean, I will never forget this experience. It changed my life. So.
How so?
So I get, and they wanted me to like bus around, and I'm like, I'm not from, like, I'm not going to, so I always had like an escort with me from Beat the Streets, because I'm like, I'm not from here. I'm not going to, it'll take me 3 hours to get there. Like, I don't know how to do this. I'm from Oregon, okay?
Right.
And so we go to the first school, and it's literally this huge building. I mean, if you've been to New York, you know what I'm talking about. It's this huge building. It says whatever school on it. You go in, and all the windows are barred up, and it's gated. And you go in, and it's like every hall, every door, it's like fences and bars. It's just like, it's bizarre.
Institutionalized presentation.
We're in New York, though, so I'm like, don't judge Kelsey. And I'm still like, I'm an Olympian. I mean, yes, I went through my surgery, or I'm like going through my injury, and I'm going through my own stuff, but like, you forget what it's like to pay for toilet paper. That's where I'm at mentally.
Wow.
You forget things, right? That's why I bring that up. You forget. And I'm walking in the school. I go up these stairs, and we're like trying to find like where I'm gonna speak. And I go in, and there's like this. We make it, and I realize this building is like 5 different schools, which is normal in inner cities.
Yes.
It is normal. And I don't know what your experience is with that.
Yeah, I'm from the Bronx.
So maybe you went to one of these schools.
Yeah.
That's where I did my last music video, was Bronx County.
I seen it.
So yeah, and it was beautiful. I'd never been to that spot in my life. I was like, what? This place is amazing. And there's so much of that there. But that does not exist without that, right? So I go into this building, and like it, like literally, like it hurts me to even like think about this, because like, you realize how lucky you are to get out of that, right? Or whatever. I realized, yeah, I've been through some stuff, but I'm not going to sit here and talk about that. That doesn't make a difference. I go in, and I remember I started in a gym, and it was like crazy. I mean, I just remember chaos. And I meet with the gym teacher, and he's like, yeah, just speak to whoever. And then he walked off. And I mean, it's so weird because I remember thinking this guy does not even care. I mean, he's been here so long, he stopped caring. He's a teacher that stopped caring.
Wow.
And you know, I was like, it's not. I remember thinking it's like it's not even his fault. How do you care?
System.
No one's even giving you a chance to care.
System.
So then we finally make it to the auditorium, and I have my escort, whatever, and I'm speaking, and in my spiel, I realized very quickly, talking about flying on a plane to meet Kobe Bryant. I mean, these kids, number one, have never been on a plane. They don't know who the hell Kobe Bryant is. Kobe Bryant. They don't know who the hell Kobe Bryant is.
Wow.
That's how inner city this was.
Wow.
Like, you're sitting there talking about, like, where do you want to go in the world? And they're looking at you blank face because they're like, I just want to go to the corner market and get some candy and hang out with my friend. Like, that is like a good day for these kids.
Wow.
Not getting recruited by a gang. I'm not saying that to be stereotypical. I'm like for real. And I realized my stupid spiel that I thought was so inspirational and relatable was like so stupid. And so that was like one of my early speeches, right? And so I went to a couple other places like that and I adjusted it. And then I went to like a private school where they were more like quote unquote me, right?
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like even with all the struggles I went through, like I have privilege. And that's when I learned what privilege was. And I realized privilege doesn't just apply to one race. Privilege is circumstantial. And that's when I realized really my world is not the world. So for me, that was 2013. We weren't even talking about these things in social media. So, you know, when we bring up abortion, or we bring up punitive measures, or I think about those kids and I'm like, I probably spoke to a kid that's in prison right now.
Wow.
So you want to tell me that they deserve to die? I don't know. Like, what could I have done differently? There was a lot of people that had a hand in that journey to jail. Like, is that kid responsible? I watch enough crime TV too much, actually, because I am always scared of getting, like, abducted. And I get it from my dad because we watch the same shows. But, like, literally, you know, you watch these shows, I Am a Killer, and all these, you know, whatever. And those shows are interesting because they present the criminal, and before they shared like the crime and the victims, they share the criminal's background, because they want to leave it to you as the viewer to make a choice. Like, okay, well, if you had been in this life, the files of Gabriel Hernandez, and I'm a hardcore empath, so when I watch stuff like that, I'm really into documentaries. When I watch stuff like that, I don't forget it. I think about it and I dream about it and I think about it for days and I don't sleep. If you haven't seen it and you're an empath, I would recommend not watching it. But that show, it just showed one situation of a child that ultimately he ended up dying. His parents killed him. They abused him to death. And that was a situation where there's a phrase for it, and I don't know it. I was just talking about it with someone recently, where in families the parents like abuse one child but nobody else. There's a phrase for it. Like it's actually a thing, right? In criminology. Can you believe that?
Wow.
It's a thing to abuse like one child. And this child, they would make him eat cat litter, and they would burn his skin with cigarettes, and it was horrific, and he died. And if he hadn't died, what would he have become? Well, probably one of a number of things. He could have either been an advocate and a social worker, which is one path that a lot of children like that take. He could have been an artist that died of a drug overdose, which you see all the time. He could have become R. Kelly. He could have become a serial killer. He could have become a loving father like a lot of the Native Americans in Canada. I don't know how much you followed that story, all the children that were found. And then suddenly we realized, oh, like all of these Native Americans in the U.S. and Canada were abused their whole lives. And now they're alcoholics, and we judge them because they're alcoholics. But We literally took their rights, we took their lands, we took their children, and then we abused them and then killed them sometimes. And now we judge them because they're at the liquor stores more than we are. So when you or whoever asks me, you don't think this person deserves the death penalty, and I say, well, explain to me why someone deserves something. Explain that to me, because if we're going to address, and this isn't on you, this is a question, this is something I face a lot when I do decide to engage in social media, and trust me, I get
Deep in it.
I mean, I get deep in it, but people are just mean. People are really horrific, because people come at me and I'm like, you don't understand where I'm coming from, though. You haven't spoken to these people. You haven't seen these places. You're sitting on your phone having an opinion because your parents are in the military and you're a patriot. And you've always had health insurance, and you have never had to do anything to get $1 except ask your parents. You've never done anything to get $1 except ask your parents. Can you imagine? What would you do to get $1 if you couldn't get it from your parents? Because I've done a lot of things to get $1, not from my parents, right? So it's not that I don't see what you're saying. It's that I feel like, and I've always believed this since I was really young. And I mean, I can go back in my journals. It's weird because I've always had this belief because of what I've seen and experienced. Okay, if you believe someone deserves to die for their crime, then what do the people deserve that had a hand in who they became? Because if we're going to talk about that, let's talk about that. So it's not that
Good point.
I'm not saying Ted Bundy didn't deserve death. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's not, if I'm going to say he deserves death, then what do we have to say about his parents who law enforcement knew? It's not like people didn't come to his house. I mean, these criminals, if you watch documentaries, that's what they do. They're not fiction. They're shows, but it's not even really reality TV because it's not scripted in that way. I mean, you're literally interviewing people that have done horrendous crimes. And, a lot of these people will say, yeah, child services always came and I had to learn how to answer correctly so I didn't get beat after they left. I mean, I've read books. I have read so many books. I have a bookshelf. I should have taken a picture for you. I have a bookshelf of books I've read on these people. This is stuff I actually really care about. It's not just a soapbox. Like, I've always really cared about this stuff. So, these people, I mean, child services showed up. The police showed up. Pedito, the girl that just died, the police knew. They saw it. And everyone has an opinion about it. It's like, yeah, but in the moment, no one had an opinion about it. And you know how many people go missing every day?
All the time.
All the time. And so if we are gonna, if we are gonna judge, okay, well, let's examine that. Let's examine really,
Right.
So it's not that I'm for killing babies. It's not that. Because I do think a lot of people are irresponsible. But the other thing I realized in that New York, I learned a lot of things on that speaking tour. That truly changed my life. Not only did I see firsthand why teachers stopped caring, and trust me, I don't believe you should coach or teach, and I've been told I should be a coach. My whole life I've been told I should coach, and I don't want to coach, so I don't. I know I could be good at it, but the reason I don't do it is because of this stuff, because I learned that tour showed me you don't do this stuff unless you are willing to do it till the end. You don't stop caring and keep doing it. You don't. You can't.
Wow.
The second you stop caring, we're talking about children.
Right.
The second you stop, and that's why people care more when babies are killed and when children are killed and when pregnant women are killed. They care more about pregnant women being killed than they care about telling a pregnant woman what you can and can't do. You find that kind of interesting, right? But we are all struck when a pregnant woman's killed, when a young girl who hasn't lived her life is killed. We're so shook, but we don't have a problem. 50% of Americans don't have a problem when a black man is kneeled and suffocated to death. You know, there's actually a lot of people that feel like that was justified. You know what I'm saying? Why is that? When did he stop being a cute young baby black boy that was adopted by Angelina Jolie? When did he become like worthy of that type of death? When do we stop caring and we're like, no, you should know better? When did that happen? When the teacher stopped caring?
Wow.
You know? And I'm sitting here like, I won't even take a train without an escort. I'm part of it. You know? And so, but the other thing that I learned from that experience was I can't put my finger on it exactly. And there's things that I've even learned because, you know, my fiance and I, we want to have a family. And I've never tried to have a family. And I'm 36. I was an athlete in an era where female athletes, people just didn't care.
Right.
I mean, Allison Felix, the backlash she got from Nike.
Right.
And we only know about that because she talked about it, not because it was known.
Right.
Right? So, you know, that wasn't even, it never crossed my mind. I have friends that had children during their careers, and I'm like, you are super women. Like, so now I'm understanding, oh, it's not actually as simple as like, oh, you just like hook up or like, it's not that simple. There's like more to it. And that sounds silly, maybe. I don't know if you have children, but
yeah,
I don't have children, and I've never tried to have children. I've actually never been on birth control, which for some people that's a personal topic, but I've never been on birth control. I actually try to do most things holistically. Like I hadn't gotten a vaccine for like 15 years until I got Moderna. So like I am a person that like tries not to do things like big pharma. But so I say that to say,
so you're vaccinated.
I am vaccinated. Yes.
What do you say to the people who's not?
It's your choice, but it's also a company's choice to tell you can't work there anymore. And it's also Broadway's choice to tell you can't come to the show. I just saw Wicked, and it was the best experience of my life, and you couldn't get in without being vaccinated. So my fiance had to stay at the hotel. It was great. And I was like, you know what? You're going to have to figure this out because I'm not going to not do stuff. I am an artist. Like, so I do believe that people have the choice. I do believe that. Right. It's not just the things that I care about. I do believe you want to call this democracy, then, you know, be a democracy.
Right.
But I also believe, you know, if United doesn't want to employ you because you're not vaccinated, that's their choice. You know, a lot of the films that I auditioned for because of COVID, there's a lot of projects I'm on, not all of them, but a lot of them require vaccination. And I would say probably like 80% of them, you have to get tested within 72 hours. And the mandates are pretty strict. And as an athlete, when I was competing, we got tested every week. When I went and coached at Olympic trials, I got tested 3 times before I could even sit in the corner. And you always had to have a mask on unless you were on the mat. And, you know, I think as a performer, it wasn't an issue for me. And my dad has stayed with me on and off, and he's older, and he has some health issues. So for me, it was like never a political thing. I was like, well, first of all, if I test positive, I can't compete or train. And if someone tested positive in my training group, like they would shut practices down for 2 weeks. So, and then I can't get roles if I test positive, and I could literally risk my dad's health if I, you know. And so for me, like, early on, and I've traveled to Asian countries like my entire career, and I've seen mostly Asian countries, but even Europe too. People wore masks for decades because of. So for me, it wasn't a big deal, and maybe that's my liberal culture, whatever. Growing up in Oregon, it just like wasn't a big deal. But I think one big thing I realized being in New York was that. And it's crazy because I really didn't realize this. But truly, there are so many youth that do not get educated on procreation. Like, there's such a lack in education.
Yes.
And people, like a lot of people that have these staunch, like, stances on abortion and sex education and whatever else, I'm like, yeah, but you know what? You grew up and you were educated and you went to your college and you
Did what you had to do.
and you always had a solution. And I'm telling you, I have looked in the eyes of a 13-year-old girl that didn't have that. And I wondered after I left, telling her my cute inspirational story, I wondered if this even made a difference. And that is a really heavy feeling, to feel like I have sacrificed so many years for this sport, and this girl is like just trying to make it out of high school. I mean, after doing that, and people don't ask me about this tour a lot, and I've only spoken about it a handful of times, but I saw firsthand that, like, it's actually a miracle in some cities for people to graduate.
Right.
In my high school, there was like one or two girls that got pregnant in high school, and it was so taboo. I actually personally, I remember thinking, I'm so grateful it didn't happen to me. I remember thinking that. Not necessarily judging, but kind of judging in that way, right?
Yeah.
But, you go to a school where, like, statistically, most of these kids will probably have a child out of wedlock or knocked up or whatever, and they will never have known what education teaches so many of us, and they will never know life outside of government aid because of their parents. And I believe in government aid, not so people can take advantage of it, but because I grew up poor, and I actually don't rely on government aid now, but I understand what it's like to, and that was like the only chance we had. So, like, when you ask me, you don't think a pedophile should be killed, or you think it's okay to abort a baby? Well, you're asking me some specific questions, and I just don't think that there's a one size fits all. I just don't. How can I?
Well, who do you put first is the question.
Yeah, right?
Who do you put first?
Well, I think you have to decide what your baseline is, because I could say, well, it's the person at hand, but if we're in, if we're in, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a country that's not like Iran, where women don't have as many rights, and the Iranians, I actually know quite a few Iranians, and they're beautiful people. Middle Easterners, I'll say, generally speaking, there's a lot of beautiful, passionate people. We know because we all watch MMA fights here and there. We know who these people are. Right. So I think if your baseline is like Middle East, like Candace Owens, I think she made a statement not like a few months ago. She was like, yeah, Middle East knows about masculinity, because she was like dogging Harry Styles or whatever. So if your baseline is the Middle East, then yeah, you're going to say, well, it's actually the man and the government. If your baseline is Middle East or what, that's a very generic statement. I'm not trying to stereotype. I'm being very general.
Right.
If your baseline is the U.S., well, we claim to be a democracy.
Right.
So why on earth would a 50-year-old white man be able to tell me as a mixed woman what I can do with my body because I live in Texas? Like, tell me how you are qualified. How are you more educated in life and in school? Because I have an MBA in business. So you want to tell me that you have more education and qualifications, politically and otherwise, to tell me what I can do with my ovaries? Now, I'm not saying I want to abort a child that's like 8 months. I'm not saying that's okay. I'm saying you don't have the right to tell me it's okay or it's not okay. That's what I'm saying. So you say, well, who do you put first? I'm like, well, I'm not trying to be difficult, but like, what is your baseline? Are you asking someone from the Middle East? Are you asking for someone from the U.S.? Are you asking somebody from China, where at one time you're only allowed to have one child, and they still, like, a lot of people there culturally value men? And even like my fiance's ex-wife is Chinese, and her children, like their children were raised in the U.S., but they all moved to Peru, so they have some Peruvian cultural influences. I mean, like,
Right, yeah.
we've got some kids that were raised a certain way.
Yeah.
And in America, that would look privileged, but in China, that's normal. In Peru, that's normal, but here they're spoiled.
Right.
So what's your baseline?
Right.
You know?
I see your point.
You know? So,
yeah.
yeah.
Everybody's going to come out different on that topic.
Right.
So, as an ex-athlete, government play a role. The man with the money play a role. In other words, the franchise owner, the CEO, they play a role in athletes' decisions. Whether you like it or not, it is what it is. For example, Democrats and Democrats, liberals, and the Republicans. Okay, everybody's promoting the vaccine. Okay, I think it's a personal choice. If you for it, good for you. If you're not, I think it should be respected, but it's not.
By anybody.
By
any
anybody.
side.
By any side.
Crazy.
Political, Republican, doesn't matter. So now athletes, for example, in the NBA, are facing severe consequences where they're not going to be able to participate in the game if they're not vaccinated. And obviously they're affected by the House of Representatives, the House of...
Like they cross over.
They cross over.
A little bit, yeah.
Right.
What I read and what I understand about pro sports is it's not that you can't compete without being vaccinated. It's that, let's say you test positive and you're not vaccinated, your quarantine is like much significantly longer than if you're vaccinated. Like the consequences, so to speak, are different than if you're So that's kind of what I don't know the exact. I'm sure every sport's different, but
right. But now athletes are paying the price for what's happening in Washington, as we all are. But the point is, should that be allowed for athletes to be able to be a professional, want to play the game, to work hard all their life to get to this point, for somebody in Washington to say, hey, you can't play that game you practiced all your life, paid the price to be there, and you feed your family with this opportunity that you earn. I'm telling you, you can't no longer do that if you do not get vaccinated. Do you think that's fair?
I don't think fair is the right word. I think private entities, we're not like in our country, the government does not, like we're not Russia. If you're a pro basketball player, if you're a pro athlete in Russia, the government not only funds what you do, but because they fund what you do, they decide what you do. In the U.S., we are not built that way, unless you're like, I think I mentioned WCAP earlier, because you're literally, that's like GI Bill stuff. I agree with you. I do think it's a personal choice, and it has been really weird to see grown adults harass and name call. It's like, and then you wonder why kids bully each other because, I mean, look at their example. Like, you know, this is not very complicated.
Right.
But I think it is a personal choice, but, you know, in the NBA is not government funded. I believe our current president was trying to pass or mandate, or did pass a mandate, I'm not sure actually, that government positions like employees need to be vaccinated, right? But specifically with pro sports, I feel that, you know, if let me I'm trying to find an example. So, I mean, I guess I'll just start with my own personal experience. So when things shut down in Arizona, and Arizona's like the Wild West, we were like the last people to shut down. We're kind of just like different. We're not like California, but we're not like Alabama. Like
Right.
we're kind of like whatever.
Yeah. I love Arizona.
Right. It's kind of weird because here, I do feel like people are pretty responsible. Even you don't hear a lot about people like protesting outside of elementary schools here. That's like other places. I mean, if you go to Gilbert, yeah, people are going to play golf with no masks on. Like, it's just like nothing changed, right? I saw it firsthand. But I remember when everything shut down, but then when my club, Sunkist, we started training again, there were a lot. So I'm an alumni of ASU. So as an alumni that graduated, I have the right to go on the wrestling mat. Like, I have some freedoms with ASU that, like, someone moving here to train doesn't have, which is kind of awesome. There's, like, a lot of really strict NCAA rules with that. So when COVID happened and we had all these senior athletes here that weren't college students, like the school ASU, they're so strict about, like, the NCAA is so strict. So when it's happened, a lot of colleges like have Olympic senior athletes that train with college students. That's not an ASU thing. That's like a USA thing. That's like very normal everywhere. Swimmers do it, wrestlers, track athletes. That's very normal. Most Olympic athletes train alongside college athletes. It's normal. So when this happened, it was very tricky because NCAA has different standards of rules for competition. For example, NCAA, you cannot have like THC in your system at all at any time. But in like Olympic sports, you can, as long as you're not competing. If you test, right? So it's different.
Right.
When this happened, so the first step was finding a place to train, but then there's liabilities because if somebody's like, okay, you can train here, well, then there's liabilities, right? So we finally got a place to train, and we, all the athletes, we were all together. And I remember because we were outside of the wrestling room, and we were all 6 feet apart because we were on ASU campus. And Art Martori, he'll kill me if he ever hears this, because he's like the guy behind Sunkist. And his daughter, Kim Martori, and they like run Sunkist. They, we sat down, we had a talk, like come to Jesus talk, and they were basically, because like during all this, a lot of the major tournaments had been shut down, like NCAA's and all that stuff, and pro teams, like everything was getting shut down, but there were still like exhibition matches happening, and there was no protocol. So you could go to these and wrestle and you could get prize money, but you could also test positive and then you're out for 3 weeks and who knows. And this was like last year. We didn't really know the long-term effects.
Right.
I mean, this was back when the elderly in New York were dying in droves, right?
Unfortunately.
And I remember Art saying, I'm not going to sit here and tell you can't go to this stuff, but I'm going to tell you shouldn't. And, we're paying you guys to train here and we're giving you a place to train. And if you go on that and there's no, he was against there not being protocols. At this time, I don't even think a vaccine was like available. It was pretty early in Arizona's timeline. And so I remember like a lot of us made the decision to not do exhibition matches, and we forewent prize money, and we really, and that's hard during a pandemic because I think at that point we didn't know. I think the Olympics had just been delayed. There was just so many questions like, well, to get better you have to compete, and like if I get offered $2,000 to wrestle one match, why wouldn't I? That's like $1 million in wrestling world. Like you don't ever get those opportunities. But we have Art Martori telling us, I would advise you to not do that. And so, with these teams that are privately funded, you sign a contract. When I signed with Sunkist is kind of like, in wrestling there's clubs, in the NBA there's city teams, right? It's kind of the same. You're choosing, no one reads the fine print, but you're kind of choosing, like you're being employed by this private entity. Now, on the other hand, so it's like, yeah, well, they have the right to not employ you, or they have the right to say, well, these are the punitive measures we have to take if you choose not to do this.
Now, what should an athlete do when the protocol does not lead to the best interest for everyone? What?
Right. So that's actually kind of, I was leaning towards that a little bit. So I haven't even given you an answer yet because I don't think these things are simple. But, you know, I don't know if you remember last year when those athletes peacefully protested at the qualifiers. And as I competed in the Olympics, I've qualified for 2 U.S. teams, and I know, people really think that you get like a call one day and they're like, you're going to the Olympics, and then you just kind of train at 24-hour fitness and then you just show up. Like, people think it's like that, but it's not. There's a lot of paperwork involved and there's a lot of logistics involved, and
like drug testing.
Drug testing, I mean, as soon as you make a national team, if you win any regional competition, you're going to get drug tested. So once you break through that barrier, like, that's part of it. Like, athletes know that.
Naturally, yeah.
Some of the rules are outdated. I do think the THC rule is outdated, but it's a rule. Sha'Carri knew. She knew. I don't feel bad for her. A lot of Olympic athletes were silent about that because we all know the rules. Right?
Yeah, but
that's a different subject.
yeah, that's the next.
Yeah. We'll talk about that next, right?
Yeah.
We'll talk because I have some. I have some insight on that.
Okay.
But there's a lot of, so when all that happened, that was tricky for me because I was like, well, it is in the fine print, but we're talking about social issues. We're not talking about steroid use. Like, we're talking about things that at one time it was illegal for me to drink in this water. Like, we're talking about issues where, like, I was like Trevor Noah, like, it was illegal for me to exist. Like, me. Like, we're talking about something that, like, should never have been a rule. So that is really, that's a slippery slope because we're talking about a white guy who's like, no, I'm going to use my platform to speak up on police brutality, and they're telling him you can't compete at the Olympics for raising your fists peacefully and silently. And it's like, well, that's in the rules, but we need to be doing these things. This has to happen.
Well,
right?
when they do this and they hold them accountable like that because they have the power of the money, the dollar, they have the power of the endorsement, they have the power, etc. Shouldn't there be a union that fights for athlete that can say, look, you're not going to do this to them. They have rights too.
So every national governing body, so an NGB is the NBA for every Olympic sport. So for wrestling, we have USA Wrestling. Within USA Wrestling, we have an athlete governing body. And it's not student council in high school. It's pretty serious. Like, when you get voted onto that, you are involved in the procedures of appointing an Olympic team. Like, you are involved in some big decisions. And then with the Olympic Committee for the U.S., they have their own governing bodies. And they have representatives. They're usually like coaches. And then the World Wrestling, like United World Wrestling, which is like the biggest wrestling entity below the Olympics,
Big
right?
Time, yeah, the big timers.
They have their governing body. And like, if you know what you're doing as an NGB, as the NBA, you're going to push to be represented in all of these different levels, right? So the only way, it's kind of like this. It's kind of like this. The people that are like, I don't vote because I think it's stupid, right?
Right.
So if you don't vote, you don't have a right to say it's stupid. You're not doing anything at all. The first step is to vote, right?
Yeah, but even if you're voting, and
that's the first step.
If you're voting, the people who don't vote, some people excuses say, maybe the elected party does not have my best interest.
Right.
Not only for me, but for my family.
Right.
Now, who do you put first? Do you put your family first, or do you put the elected official first?
And that's, I read this quote the other day. Progress sometimes is in the form of steps, not jumps. So I think a lot of times people have this stance on voting because they want a jump, and they don't realize women weren't given the right to vote right away. It took Black people were not given the right to be considered a full human right away. We were literally, like, what were we? We were like a tenth or something. Like, we were literally a percentage of a human.
Right.
We were considered property.
Right.
That did not happen overnight.
Right.
Am I saying I agree with it? No, but we're dealing with humans. We're not dealing with bots and computers. In spite of what Twitter might make you think, you're dealing with humans that disagree with you. So the only way to change something is you take a step and then you take another step. This is my opinion, okay?
So you're saying they should vote regardless?
Well, I'm not. You don't have to vote. I'm just saying you can't sit around and be like, it's so stupid and do nothing. At the very least, run for position.
Yeah, but even if you're doing the right thing, it's still the wrong thing. Because I vote is the right thing.
Because it's against the rules, right? Because he's peacefully protesting. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's where I'm telling you, I'm not going to sit here and act like I have the answers. All I can say, because there's some things I feel like you have the right to choose. You do not have to get a vaccine. I am not going to tell you have to get an abortion. Do I think you should stop sleeping around? Do I think Mariah's baby daddy needs to stop messing around because he has like 4 kids in 3 years or whatever? That's like, what? But you want to tell me what to do with my ovaries, whatever. Like, okay, those are some hardline stances I have, and don't play with me because I will come at you, okay? And I am educated. I'm giving you my opinions. I haven't brought out the books, okay? Whatever. But then there's some things, if someone's familiar with the Bible, there's things that the Bible refers to as like disputable matters, right? And when I was really heavily involved in the ministry, we would talk about, there was this saying that we had that was like, speak where the Bible's silent, but be silent where the Bible speaks. And that's just religion. That's just Christianity, essentially, right?
Do you believe a woman should be submissive to her husband under all circumstances?
I think... Same answer. What's your baseline?
What's your opinion on it?
My opinion is if you really truly believe in like the Christian Bible and you understand the meanings and the translations and the accurate translations, because NIV isn't the most accurate translation. I mean, it is kind of in the general meaning of the phrases, but there's more accurate translations. And that NIV is like what most people read, and King James, which is kind of word for word accurate. If you're choosing to follow that and you understand like the premise of the scripture, then yeah, I do. If you're saying I'm a Christian and I follow the Bible, then yeah, you should follow it.
Even if your husband's decision is not in your best interest, you should follow it?
I'm not saying you should follow it. I'm saying if you're choosing to be a Christian, a biblical Christian, you should be a biblical Christian.
By all means.
But here's the thing. If you and your husband are biblical Christians, my assumption would be that these are opinion matters, okay? I'm not saying these are my opinions, okay? If you're married to someone and you guys are both like, we're biblical Christians, I would assume you and your husband have similar views on whatever we're talking about in terms of submission.
Well, not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I don't know. So, but that's how else can I answer that? Because if you're choosing to be a biblical Christian, that's what the Christian Bible says. So what else am I supposed to say? Right?
Right. So let's say you're following the biblical process. You're married.
Right.
And your husband want to perform above normal sexual experience.
Practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Based on your belief, should you move forward or should you...
Well, from what I've read in the Bible, like between And you know, this is something I actually have wanted to revisit. But from what I know and what I understand and have studied, and I am open to educated criticism, whatever. If it's between a man and a woman in like marriage, there's not like a lot of things you can't do, right? Biblically. So, but I do think it's hard to talk about these things because we're jaded, because there's a lot of pollution in the religious world. Obviously, like the Catholic culture. I mean, I swear every other week it's like priests are trending for being pedophiles. And I'm like,
not again.
I would love to send my kids to a Catholic school, but like that ain't even it. I might as well send them to like Rikers. What the heck difference is there, right? Like, so I think if you take away the jade from like human error and you just look at the scripture, and I think also people historically, especially in the U.S., religious political leaders have polluted what it actually says. They're like, well, the Bible says an eye for an eye. The Bible says slaves are okay. And it's like, okay, you are like literally like converging the Old and the New Testament, and you're like, it's like confirmation bias with like a sprinkle of like, I stole land from the Indians, and also I'm American and I'm arrogant, and also I'm a white man. Like, and you've created this new era American Christianity that's like very far removed. That's why we have, denominations. The actual translation is of a name group. Wow. Denomination, like if you don't believe me, you can look it up. It literally means like of a name group. So like groups of names, like Methodists and Lutherans and Catholics, and we have all these denominations. I mean, it's crazy. It's been a few years since I graduated my undergrad, but like I remember studying some of these like small town denominations and watching film. And again, I don't even think Wikipedia was a thing back then. So you actually had to like find scholarly journals and watch actual footage. And it was like, I was like, wow. And it wasn't even like these people were bad-hearted. It's just they're small towns and they're not exposed to anything else. So it might as well be 1875. They might as well be living in a different era, because, there's literally like villages in Africa where they've never seen, or actually there's a Hawaiian island where they literally don't use iPhones, and their immune system isn't up to par, and they don't, and that's Hawaii. That's like, Hawaii's pretty modern. Like they rely on tourism. They're as modern as it gets, right. But I think our perspective of religion is very, very tainted. And so I think from a pure biblical standard, if I were to sit down with Jesus, I would ask him the same questions you're asking me, because I don't necessarily know. But from what I know, and, be silent where the Bible speaks, speak where the Bible's silent. The Bible says be submissive, whatever. But it's also assuming you're man. The Bible also doesn't say anything about dating. It talks about courting briefly. It doesn't talk about dating. It just says don't be yoked with non-believers. Well, what is a yoke? They're not talking about eggs. They're talking about farming. They're talking about the yoke that like keeps cows together in a straight path. Like if we're talking about context, like, or, it's harder for the rich man to go through the eye of a needle,
Basically hard to get into heaven.
We could talk about like a location in the Middle East, which some people argue they're referring to, or we could talk about an actual needle. Either way, it's freaking difficult. And so like some of it is up for interpretation, but let's talk about, like the Bible says, let there not be and I'm telling you this as someone educated in the scripture, but I believe in the scripture. I actually have faith, but I'm not currently living according to it.
Why?
Well, I know a lot about the Bible. Most people aren't living according to it. So to a lot of people, I'm actually living pretty awesomely, but I'm keeping it real. Let's be honest, okay? So we could talk about tattoos and piercings. I have both of those, and some people would argue that's very ungodly, but, you know, I could show whatever. So, you know, whatever. Like,
Yeah. So
quid pro
do you
quo.
think politics and religion should mix?
I mean, the baseline, if you're coming from a non-religious baseline, what does it matter? I would say non-religious, like, no, because if you take religion out of politics, like, you're not, like, no, you wouldn't even have the concept of, like, a child in the womb. Like, there's scriptures that talk about, that's why people get very, most people don't even understand what the scriptures really teach. They just know a few that talk about, I was formed before I knew you. And they know the really fluffy scriptures, Jeremiah 29 and John, whatever, 4 or whatever. So people refer to the scriptures, but it's like such a shallow understanding. From a religious perspective, if you really understand the scripture, I think that I still don't think they should mix, because Christianity, you say religion, but what we're really talking about is Christianity, right? We're not talking about being Muslim. We're not talking about being Hindu. We're talking about Christianity. We're talking about Western civilization.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the U.S.
Absolutely.
And the U.S., we took our Christianity from London, England. We brought it here, and we stole land and killed people and raped people. I'm mixed and I'm light skinned, so you know that happened, right?
Facts.
And then we want to say, well, if everybody just loved God more, we'd be a better country. It's like, well, what's your baseline? So, like, I think they should be separate. And I think the scriptures, even there are times where Jesus said, you know, give to Caesar what's Caesar's. Like, you know, it's like you know, that's his law. Like, do what he says, you know. But he's like, if you're going to claim to be religious, he flipped tables over hypocrisy. So if you're going to say, well, I'm religious, be religious, but your religion, your baseline is inaccurate. You know, like, you're basing it off of the founding fathers, based off the scripture, not the founding fathers, because they stole land. So if we want to go there, that's like, it's just, it's different conversations.
Transgender are possibly going to be granted the same rights as your average citizen, where they can go to the same restroom, they can use the same bathroom as a 5-year-old. Do you think that is the right thing?
I don't know.
Why don't you know?
I don't know if it's the right thing. I think there are.
Do you think transgender?
You want to know why I don't think it's I don't know. I'm going to tell you why. I'm not that complicated. Listen, you've agreed with me when I've explained myself. I'm going to explain myself. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I want you to understand that some of these things aren't that simple. Okay, so for example, there are politicians in Texas right now that are saying publicly, if we all got back to religion, we would be raising better families. But we know most of the pedophilia that exists in religion is Catholicism, right?
Facts.
So that is
Not true.
such an inaccurate statement, right?
Not true.
So to say, well, he's a God-fearing man doesn't mean he's not a predator. It doesn't mean
kids.
It doesn't mean he's not abusing his children, right?
Facts.
So does he, as just a straight white man or a straight black man or whatever man, a religious man, he has the right to be in the bathroom with my son, but a transgender doesn't? Wow. Do you see what I'm saying? Wow. So people want to be like, oh, that's so messed up. I don't want my kid around that. Well, like, you do know that, like, 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 females have been sexually assaulted in their life. 1 in 5.
Wow.
That doesn't just mean that 25 out of the 100 people you graduated with were sexually assaulted. That's been reported, so there's probably more.
Right.
There's probably, because most people don't
A lot
report
more,
it.
right? Mm-hmm.
That means most of the men you know have done these things, That's what that means. Think about that. That means your best friend, he could have been like assaulting his younger sibling. That means your best man in your wedding could have been assaulting their cousin. That means the person you looked up to that you learned from to do all this. Yeah, we want to be like, we want to distance ourselves from reality, and we want to talk about things that are comfortable, but let's talk about the real facts. Let's talk about reality. The reality is, if that's true, if it's 1 in 5, which that number is not totally accurate because most women don't report it, and when they do report it, even if it's 10 years later, we do victim shaming in this country excessively. And
Unfortunately.
right? I mean, we have people on Supreme Court that have been accused of these things 3 decades after the fact, and because it was 3 decades later, people feel like it's not like accurate or relevant, but it's like, I mean, you don't have to tell me names. I'm going to ask a question. Do you know someone that's been sexually assaulted? Right now, do you know somebody?
Actively, no.
Do you know someone that has?
Yes.
Did they report it?
No.
How long ago did this happen?
25 years, perhaps.
So what would happen legally if they reported it?
Justice would be pursued.
Maybe, except that we have this thing in place that says after a certain amount of time, you can't actually legally
Report it.
right?
Yeah.
And so I'm asking that question because I'm like, listen, if you think it's unfair that transgendered people can go in a bathroom, transgender people that are more often than not the victim of these crimes. I mean, let's think about this real deeply. Not always, but sometimes. So you're more afraid of them just living their truth. And that's not a phrase I use a lot, but I'm just saying for the sake of argument, living their truth, but you're not afraid of the fact that, okay, you know people that have been assaulted that haven't reported. Therefore, there is a very good chance, and there is no statistical way to even quantify how many men you know that have done this. I mean, think about that. You probably know men. You probably respect, and I'm singling out men. I'm not saying it's just men, but I'm saying, I'm just going to, for the sake of argument, you know, respect, imitate, idolize, get advice from, call up, check in on, serve, give a platform to men that have done this. You have. You maybe don't know it, but you have. But the question you're asking me is, do you think it's right that a transgendered can use the same bathroom as your child? Well, let's talk about everybody. Because I don't think transgenders are the issue. I think predators are the issue.
Well, the fact that they have a different anatomy presents a challenge for parents.
Okay.
Concerned, loving parents to say,
I don't want my kid to see like
it's inappropriate and it's unacceptable.
Female, like sharing a whatever.
Isn't that subjecting the child to psychological and emotional abuse?
So, that's a fair question. So, I think that first of all, I think I don't think it's. I'm referring to the Bible a lot, but I know that a lot of your listeners maybe aren't Christian. I don't know. I don't want to assume they are, but I'm just using it as a reference. So Adam and Eve, like, being naked wasn't a big deal until, like, they sinned, right? It was like naked, whatever, like balls out, whatever, sun's out, guns out, all that. And then they sinned, and it was like, your balls, right? And so, as a wrestler, and I did it for so long, like around my teammates, I was like so comfortable around them. I mean, around your teammates, it's just like whatever. And even there were times around like coaches and stuff where I had to really be careful because I was so comfortable, you know? You sit in a sauna and you're in your sports bra and like a swimsuit bottom.
Right.
You're in your underwear, essentially.
Right.
But it's like acceptable, right? And there's like a gray area with that, right?
Right.
I've had a couple situations in my life where anybody and their mom could trust me with their child, but I am so careful that I don't even allow for certain things to happen around me because grooming is a real thing.
Right.
And just because you're trustworthy doesn't mean they should do certain things around you, right? Because it's not always about you. It's about the other people, right? And so I think, you know, so I have a gym membership, and I go to the gym a lot, and a lot of times I do a lot of stuff at home because I have anxiety and I don't really like to be around a lot of people when I work out. But so when I go to the gym, it's usually to like sauna or use the steam room, or it's very minimal stuff. Like I go to the gym minimally. It's not to be seen.
I'm Kelsey Campbell, motherfucker.
No, I don't. And a lot of athletes aren't like that, but I really get anxiety. It takes a lot of energy for me to like go to the gym. I can't explain it. It's a lot of energy for me. And I was with my fiance's youngest kid. We're really close. We butt heads a lot, but we're close. And she's kind of like I joke, I'm like, she's like a nasty, normal 12-year-old. She doesn't like shower very often. She goes barefoot everywhere. Like she's not my child. I can't tell her what to do, whatever. But she's living her life, whatever. I'm like, I think you're gross, but I kind of wish I was more like you. It's kind of like that. Because my life would be less stressful if I wasn't so OCD. So we've gone to and sometimes she just, you know, my fiance always says like she admires you, whatever. And you know, when you're in that role and you're like, actually she's just a butthead and she's always like a brat, but you see things how you see them.
Right.
And we go to the gym a lot together, and she always wants to come with me, but she's like, I want to sauna with you, but then she'll go in for 1 minute and then just sit in the chair and like be on TikTok. Like she just, I don't even know why she comes, but I always shower after I work out. And I'm usually like, whatever, I'm not worried about like being exposed. It's a locker room. If she's with me though, I don't expose myself ever because she's kind of family, you know, and I don't, like, I have no right to expose her to somebody that personal, right? That's not, it is different when it's kind of like, I'm not saying it's ever okay. I'm just saying like, it's not my place to expose her to myself. That's not okay to me. So I remember taking.
Like
at the gym I go to, they have changing rooms. They have curtains on the showers. It's awesome. And when she comes with me, I'm very careful about it. And the first couple times she didn't shower, and then she's like, "Well, I think I'm gonna shower, but I don't really want to like change." And I straight up, I looked at her and I was like, you never have to do anything in front of anybody. You can go in the changing room. You can walk right in there with your stuff on, take it off in the shower. And I was like, I do this because I'm an adult and I do what I'm comfortable with. But you never have to do this in front of anybody if you're not comfortable. And it was very important for me to tell her that, first of all, I think at the time she was 11. And no one had told her that. And it seems obvious as an adult.
Right.
But think about it. When you're a kid, those things aren't obvious.
Right.
You just assume whatever you see.
Right.
So I should do this because you're doing this? No.
Right.
I'm like, I'm not going to sit here and go in the shower fully clothed. I'm going to go in with a towel. But like, I'm not going to expose you to something that is not okay.
Right.
And you know, I had another situation with this wrestling family out of this MMA gym that I train at a lot. And the mom trusts me a lot, and she's Hawaiian. And I'm telling you, Hawaiians do not let people outside of their family watch their kids be around. I mean, Islanders do not play around.
Right.
You are Ohana if you've proven yourself Ohana, right? You don't get to be Ohana just because you're good at wrestling. So this, you know, and I was like one of the first like Olympic wrestlers to start training there. Not the first, but one of the first. And they've grown since then. But this mother, and she's close to my age, but she has like 7 kids because she's an Islander, and they just have great ovaries, I guess. Whatever. And like her 2 oldest children needed to lose like 1 pound each for a tournament. Like they don't cut weight or anything, but they had like 1 pound to lose. And I was like, oh, I'll help them in the sauna, whatever. It's normal after MMA or wrestling practice to go sauna. That's very normal. It's very much in our culture. And she's like, and when you're actually losing weight, as I mentioned before, you actually sweat more if you have less clothes on. Now there's this like when you're new to martial arts, you think, well, if I have more clothes on, I'll sweat more. But that's not true at all. Like your skin needs to be exposed to like kind of humid heat to sweat.
Right.
And that's how you sweat more. I mean, wrestlers have this down to a science. I could tell you how to lose 10 pounds by tomorrow. It's water weight, but I could tell you how to do it.
Right.
And she said, I've talked about this so many times with people, and she's amazing. And to this day, she's never let me babysit her kids, like, which I could. I love her kids, and I'm close to them, and I'm close to the family. But she said, if they need to like strip down or whatever, it's fine. Like if that'll help them sweat. And I turned her and I was like, so and so. I was like, I'm like, that's so awesome. But I was like, I can't do that. And I didn't get all serious and heavy, but I was just like, I can't do that because even though you can trust me, I don't want them to think that's okay around adults. It's not okay. Just because an adult tells you to get down to your underwear, even if you're me. And so I didn't do that because of the concept of grooming, because grooming is you train them to think this is okay. You start to train them. It's brainwashing. It's a form of manipulation. But,
Right.
And so like I personally, to me, it's not so much, okay, well, should they be exposed to like somebody that's changed their, like, I think it's actually I don't think that's the right question. It's not a bad question, but I think the question, it's like saying, well, is the sky blue? But if you're asking like an artist, they're like, well, it's actually kind of like aqua. Like, if you want to get specific, it's a lot more than blue. And at 6:00 in Arizona, it's kind of purple pink, whereas like
beautiful.
somewhere else, it's not, right? And so it's not that it's a bad question. It's just like, I can't tell you that someone that's transgender is a criminal for using the bathroom that your child uses. What I will tell you is you got to train your child as their parent. And a lot of these issues, even I worked at Starbucks for many years, so I was around a lot of transgendered people. Honestly, half of my staff was. A lot of these situations, a lot of times there is some issues in the parenting and there is some abuse early on. I'm not saying it's always like that, but a lot of these issues do go back to parenting, not always. And I mean, freaking free Britney. I would argue that 75% of that movement is transgendered or gay people. Like, honestly, I would argue that those people are why she's getting out of her conservatorship, and I actually have insight on conservatorships as well. So like, you're probably going to leave this and think, gosh, she can never say yes or no. It's not that. It's just that when you've seen certain angles of things and been put in situations, literally I've been put in situations with children and I've been trusted, but I also know what grooming looks like. I know what it looks like. And it's not about me. It's about them, and it's about you.
Right. Would you have your child use a bathroom alone with a transgender?
No. But I also wouldn't have my child use a bathroom alone with any adult.
Right.
That wasn't me.
Right.
So I wouldn't discriminate the fact that they were transgender. But the answer is no.
Okay. So you wouldn't vote for that bill to be passed?
I'm not familiar with the details of the bill, so I can't tell you that.
Well, that's part of it.
Right. The familiarity with the details, right? That's part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, everything is changing, everything is evolving.
Constantly.
Especially in politics, right? How is politics playing a role in your daily life routine right now?
I think it evolves for me personally too. I think I realize that I think it's important for, like, I think I have been vocal at different points in my life, but I realized being vocal you have to make a decision kind of early on. Like, am I just going to complain about stuff? Or am I going to run for office? Am I going to take a role in this actively? Am I going to be an influencer? Because even influencers make an impact, right?
Right.
People can say whatever they want, but there are people on social media that have a huge impact. Like literally, on TikTok, what is the genre of music in South Korea that's like crazy famous? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Beat
Like
me.
K-pop
yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
I
That's the
sound
new
so
one.
old. Oh my gosh. K-pop, right? So they have had a huge influence on politics. They're in South Korea. They're not even here.
Right.
They've had huge, I mean, they've literally been the reason why some of these rallies have been empty seats. And like, it's kind of incredible.
Right.
So I do think that if you're going to have an opinion and complain, I mean, you can complain and have an opinion all you want, but you've got to decide early on, like, okay, well, what's my role in this? If you're just going to complain, okay, I don't really want to hear it. If you're,
Right.
I think, like I said earlier, I think the first step is voting. I think for me, I vote, and when I vote, I mean, court justice, everything. I read about every single person. It's not something you can do in one day, in my opinion, unless you're like a sugar baby and just chilling at your house and you have nothing else to do, because that is a lot of literature.
Right. A lot of reading.
So I think, and I've read about people that are like, I'm going to take the day to research and make my choices, and I'm like, you think that's going to happen in a day?
Right.
Like, whatever, you're a fast reader. But it has impacted me because I realized I believe strongly in voting and using your voice, and that I feel like everyone has that right, and people have literally died for that right. And I personally feel like it's an insult to not vote, at least at the very least. But I understand that some people choose not to. I feel that for me, I've been a little bit quieter in terms of like being vocal on like in the social media, simply because at this time in my life, I'm not doing more than voting. So I feel like I will voice my opinions, and every now and then I do, and I certainly get responses. But I realize that just having an opinion is, it's not a bad thing, and I'm grateful for the right to voice it, but I think where I'm at right now is I'm like, until I decide to run for office or truly influence people's decisions, and there are things I've spoken up a lot about, but until I really decide to take a stance on that publicly, I have been a little bit more quiet recently. So, and like everyone's different. There's people that I wish were more vocal, that I wish cared more, but I also know when I was trying to make the Olympic team, I posted pictures of the flag, and I was like, Happy 4th of July, and had not a care in the world, and police brutality was still happening. So that was just the chapter I was at, and people are where they are,
Crazy. Right. Absolutely. Now, your life right now, okay, you're doing music as well, which is a passion for you from day one. What are you doing right now in music that's going to affect, the everyday lives people? Good or bad?
So a lot of my music is, most of my music is like real life experiences, or most of my music is music I wrote. I would say like 99% of it is.
Nice.
And I wrote them out of real experiences. Even my most recent video that I did, that song, was written out of a very challenging time in my life.
The mantra?
No, it was the New Strong. Mantra
Strong.
was my first video. The New Strong is my second.
Strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you in New York?
Yeah.
That was the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I seen that one. Very powerful.
Thank you.
Very emotional. That was personal for you.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Like, when I wrote the song, I had gone, there was a period where the honeymoon of being a high level athlete had ended, and I realized that it doesn't matter if it's USA Wrestling or the Olympics or just a random person. It's when you're not like doing the thing at number one and winning, like you're disposable. It happened really fast and subtly, and at the same time, my grandma passed away, and then my high school sweetheart, who we had reconnected, died suddenly, like literally dropped dead.
Sorry.
And my grandma, who, like, as you now know, like had a profound impact on my life, died.
Sorry.
And I had a family. I'll just say I had a family member that was homeless regularly, lived with me, and that was very challenging. That family member is actually in a conservatorship right now.
Oh, wow.
There is a place for conservatorships. I will say that. Wow. I followed the Britney case really closely because I do think there is a place for it. But hers is like straight up abuse, straight up. Wow. But I do have some insight on that. And a lot of these, like a bunch of that stuff happened at the same time. And I went through a really, really, really hard time.
How did you deal with it?
I self-medicated, and I was depressed, and I got a dog, and I couldn't really afford therapy.
No
really.
Therapy, right.
I mean, I don't even think at that time there was like online therapy, but it wasn't readily available. I mean, it was dark.
So the fact you didn't have those resources, did that create more damage?
Looking back, yeah, I think it did create some damage. I just didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't really have anyone helping me handle it. And mental health, no matter what you tell your best friends about it, I mean, the coach that I was closest to, who knew the most and who literally saw me at rock bottom.
Wow.
The coach that even he, there were moments where it was like, you just don't get this. And it's really hard to understand someone that struggles with depression or anxiety. But for me, it was like depression. So when I wrote the song, the song's called The New Strong, and it's talking about, it was kind of like I was kind of getting through that. I was kind of at the tail end of that really bad low. And I wrote a couple songs about just coming out on the other side a little bit stronger and how it looks different. And
we love your we love your music. We love your music. Definitely. We gotta get a bomb for that too. You have beautiful music. I love listening to your music. I fucking fell asleep listening to your music.
That's awesome.
It was great. It was so inspirational. But most importantly, it was coming from some place. A little dark was in there. Mm-hmm. There was a little darkness in there, right? And that's the part I connected with.
Yeah.
Okay? We all go through traumatic experiences in life that leads to depression, anxiety, loneliness, separation, suicide, unfortunately. So the list goes on. So a lot of stuff that you're talking about is also inspirational, but also uplifting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the second you realize someone else can relate, you immediately feel it's almost like the flower blooms a little bit. It's like, I mean, and we know this, we've heard it our whole lives, like that a lot of people go through the things we go through individually, but no one talks about it, right? And in the song, in The New Strong, one of the verses that I repeat a lot, I say, don't ask how it's going, nothing here you'll be showing. And it's kind of like, when I was writing, it was like this battle you have with yourself, like, I don't want anyone to ask how I'm doing because I'm not going to tell you anyways. And that's like literally how I felt. And like the first verse, it's like I'm staring straight forward, like I have a wall up, I'm focused, and I'm not letting anyone in. And like I feel in it, I'm not saying that's the way to live your life, but when you're surviving, that's what it is.
Right.
Don't ask me how I'm doing because you couldn't even handle the real answer if I gave it to you.
Wow.
So and I knew that song, you know, it kind of has a boppy, uplifting sound to it, but I knew that there there were lines in that song that unless you got it, you didn't get it. You know, like I knew that, but
Right.
that was written from a real place.
Yeah. Very good song.
So,
Continue to make music.
oh, there's plenty.
Okay.
There's plenty.
Tell people where to get your music.
I mean, I'm pretty good about sharing it on social media, but
Okay.
Spotify, I mean, all this, Apple Music,
Right.
iTunes, all those streaming platforms, the like record label
Right.
that you have to kind of register with when you decide to stream your music,
Right.
they automatically share it, like
Right.
iRadio or iHeartRadio, all those platforms they share it with. So, you know, if you search Kelsey Campbell and just search like one of my songs, like Kelsey Campbell Mantra, you can find my channel.
Love it.
Kelsey Campbell is not the most unique name, believe it or not, but yeah. So
Yeah. They'll get it.
yeah.
So with your love life right now, you have a fiance, right? And you're not really used to that lifestyle, where the fiance and the commitment thing, and because you had to really train and focus on, you know, your health, your mental stability, source of income, etc. So now, in comparison, you're living like a new lifestyle, like, and compared to what you used to live.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of weird because growing up, I was like, I'm never gonna get married because very early on, like when my parents divorced, it's weird. But I remember thinking like, oh yeah, this is what adults do. It was like weird.
Yeah.
It's like weird for a kid to think that. But that was kind of and I always wanted kids, but I was like, why would I get married? Like I had never seen one example except for like fictional TV where people like got married and it worked.
Yeah, made it.
And then I had my high school sweetheart, which obviously that did not end well. We broke up after high school, but that like changed me a little bit to where I was open, where I was like, oh, like you could. So then suddenly I would cry at chick flicks and stuff like that. It was weird, and it was like that for a while. And I was in other relationships, and I was in this relationship in like 2015 that was really serious unexpectedly. And it didn't end well. And I kind of feel like he led me on, but I like allowed it, you know? It's not like it was hard to see. I was just in it, you know?
Oh, so you was going for the ride.
Yeah, you just believe the lies, right? And then, and that was very heartbreaking because as an adult, I would say that was the first time my heart was really broken. Like as an adult, I was like still in the heart of competition, and it was that was challenging.
Why was your heart broken?
Because I really thought like we just had chemistry and we connected so well, and I just believed for whatever reason that he was the one. It's always laughable in hindsight, but in the moment I really thought like why. And I was the kind of person that was I mean I gave him an out many times. I'm like, I don't like, if you don't want to pursue this, we don't have to. Like there were opportunities to not.
Do you feel he was pressured, or he didn't want to?
No, I think he just wanted a companion. I think he didn't know what he wanted. I think it was kind of a cliche, to be honest, and I just ate it up. And I do think we had great chemistry, but just because it feels right, if it's not the right time, it's just not right. And I think that is true. And so we broke up, and that was very hard for me. And I think before that relationship, I was like, I really want to find my soulmate and my person and this and that. And I think now I don't even know. Like, I think I don't necessarily feel like I need that, which took me a lot of heartbreak and years to get to the point where I'm like, I need to be married. I need this. I need that. I don't, I think where I'm at with just myself, like, I'm like, the main thing is you have to make sure you love you, and you got to make sure that you're working on you constantly. And I don't shortcut myself ever. I mean, my fiance and I, we disagree on a lot of things. And when we first started seeing each other, it wasn't with the intent of anything long term. I think we were just both in not great spots.
How long you been dating?
Like about 4 years. So it's been a couple years. And he's great. He's incredible, and I'm very lucky. But you know,
Who don't want to get married? He don't. You don't. Who don't want to get married?
you know, I think he would get married like today if I was like, let's go to Vegas. But I'm kind of like,
Wait a minute.
I'm kind of like, I think marriage is beautiful, and I tell everybody this. I think it's beautiful, and
But
it really is.
But
You know, have you ever seen that movie? It's the J-Lo movie. It's Made in Manhattan.
of course.
So her grandmother is in the like elderly care living place with her
Right.
like really old boyfriend, and they've been there for like 4 years or so, and they're like old. And finally, after J-Lo was like lying about her whatever, she's not like made with her man or whatever, and then her grandma's like, all these years I realized he's been taking care of me and I'm gonna marry him. And they've been engaged for like 3 decades. And I told him before he even proposed to me, I was like, I just want you to know that this is probably what it's going to look like. And I'm like, I'm not telling you to change your mind, but if you want this, this is what it is. Like, I'm not going to sit here and lead you on. I'm committed.
Right.
But
right.
we might actually be in an assisted living community before we actually get hitched.
Wow. Jeez.
So, I mean, that's as real as I am. Like, I don't, you know, I've allowed so many relationships to talk me out of my mental health and my emotional health. And I've just allowed so many things to happen that.
Not again.
And I mean, I've been a bridesmaid in a lot of weddings. And weddings are so beautiful. And marriage is so beautiful. But I'm not even going to say it's not for me. I'm just going to say this is where I'm at. And this is where I've been at for a few years. And I will say this though. I did tell him, like, if we went to Australia, I would marry you. Like, if you offered, yeah, because I'm like obsessed with Australia. It's like my favorite place.
Okay.
There's some loopholes to this, but.
Okay. So some people would say that's misleading for you to do. Do you think it's misleading for you to do, or it's not misleading because he's aware of your principle and your understanding of marriage, so it's not misleading? But some people say it is because you're still with him and he has hope.
Yeah, I mean, people are allowed to think whatever they want, but
Right.
I'm not misleading him. I'm thorough. I mean, I've talked your ear off for a couple hours now. I don't cut corners. So if he feels misled, he just wasn't listening. So, but no, I don't feel like I've misled him.
Okay.
I feel like I've been so honest and straightforward in a way I never was before.
Wow.
And I'm, you know, maybe if my other relationships had gone different, I wouldn't feel this way.
Right.
But all I can say is this is where I'm at.
Right. Okay. So we're getting ready to wrap it up. I want to know, is there anything you want to say or get off your chest, or just a general spill?
I feel like after this, like whoever hears this is going to really, really like me or really, really not like me. So, I don't know.
They better like you because I love you. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you.
You on this motherfucking JJ.
I'm just trying to be me. So just listen to the music, and Mantra's really good. You know,
Yeah.
It's hard to not smile when you hear that song.
Yeah, it's hard to not love it when you hear that song.
That's an upbeat one. My dad inspired that one, so
nice.
You know.
That's an anthem. That's
yeah,
that's
it's
an
supposed to
anthem.
be.
It's an anthem. Love it. So I want to thank Kelsey Campbell for coming out. You was most lovely.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time. And thank everybody for watching, support. You know, we say a lot of things on this show that a lot of people's not going to agree with, but that's the world we're living in.
I feel like if Joe Rogan was black, that's how I feel. I'm like, we just did a Joe Rogan.
Pretty much.
I feel like that's what we just did.
Pretty much.
I don't even listen to Joe Rogan, but people like that stuff.
It's the better version of Joe
right?
Rogan.
It's the better version.
I'm the upgraded, okay?
Upgrade.
I'm tripping with motherfucking JJ.
For sure. Kelsey Clinton, we're going to log out. You're welcome here anytime, any place, anywhere. Same channel, same motherfucking time. I'm inspired by everything you said.
Thank you.
Okay? We're out of this motherfucker.
I don't give a fuck. You're tripping with JJ.
Wow!
Fuck you, asshole.
Tell your bitch I said hi, nigga.
Any crimes in this one.